The main character looked at the white sign. Rising from the ground, he thought that time and disasters, like a huge blade, cuts. Moving through the ruins, he noticed that times of disaster were cutting between old and new civilizations. Having stepped on the wreckage, the guy noted that now human civilization survives in this wasteland. He looked at the high wall and thought that huge fortress walls had been built, but order continued to collapse. The main character said with a serious look that the man said that before the disaster there was a lot of human technology. He asked why everything had disappeared now. Exhaling smoke, the stranger replied that they were in the hands of a few, and humanity's firearms were more powerful than he thought. Many workers stood in front of a huge wall. The main character asked if there was a weapon behind the wall and why not destroy it. Closing his eyes, the man asked how the interested parties behind the wall could refuse this natural class barrier. The plot tells us that when disaster strikes, survival is a must. The military walked through the settlement. The main character covered his face with a cap and hood. The military man asked if he wanted to go to Mount Jing, in which case he should ask Ren Zaiasu. As he walked past the military, he thought that this crowd of mercenaries lacked real combat experience. He wondered if they were heading into the wilds to die. A red light was visible from the forest. The main character was taken aback by this. He looked at the lava clot and saw a message that the breath of death had been detected. The monster began to crawl out of the magma. A crowd of demons ran towards the main character. A huge spider appeared and an inscription said that the breath of death had been discovered. A blue aura emanated from the wolf. There were drops of blood on the ground. Frowning, the protagonist wondered what, for them outside the walls, is their first weapon in the face of danger. A crowd of monsters stood in front of him. A message appeared asking if he wished to unlock his bonds. The main character was furious. There was a powerful energy in the area. He cried out that he wanted to unlock the shackles. It was raining heavily. The rat's corpse lay under the trap. Sitting in the bushes, the main character thought that it was bad luck and acid rain began to fall before the arrival of the prey. He noted in his mind that if he didn't bring the loot today, Yuan and he would die of hunger. As he continued to lie down, he emphasized the fact that even a sparrow would do. He saw the wings of a bird in the sky. Watching her closely, the main character thought that this was great and that this was really a sparrow. He looked at the bird. Her eyes glowed red. He jumped up sharply. He dodged the huge bird. The main character reached for the frying pan. Grabbing it, he prepared for battle. The bird jumped up from the ground. She flew towards the main character. Frowning, he noted in his thoughts that he was fast. He hit the bird with a frying pan. The sparrow fell to the ground. The main character jumped on the bird. He grabbed her by the throat. He broke the bird's neck. Sighing, he said that after waiting all night, he finally got something. Throwing the loot onto his shoulder, he said that it was still early, so he would just go to Lao Wang's store to sell the bird and estimated that he could exchange it for a couple of days of rations. He was suddenly taken aback. Falling to the ground, he mentally asked why now. Closing his eyes, the main character thought that usually this happened at midnight, but this time earlier. A blue aura enveloped his body. He noted and thought that this had been happening regularly since the day he escaped from the wolves, and people in the city said that it was just a headache, but he knew that. The hero felt that he was falling into the abyss. He fell in a dark space. He emphasized that he knew that this sensation was not pain, but pure chaos. As he fell into the abyss, he wondered what was happening. Looking at his hand, the main character wondered if he was conscious this time. He looked at the bright light. Squinting, he wondered what it was. He saw the outline of a palace in front of him. The main character stood on a white floor in a dark space. He approached the palace gates. He opened the doors. The main character began to examine the dark walls with golden patterns. The walls were enveloped in dark energy. He continued to look around with a serious face. As he approached the table, he wondered where he was. Frowning, he looked at the streams of mana. His gaze fell on the table. He asked what was on it. He narrowed his eyes in pain. Red lightning struck in the sky. The bald man was hiding behind a tree. He watched the main character, who was unconscious. Opening his eyes, the main character wondered if he had come to his senses so quickly this time. Taken aback, he noticed in his thoughts that the rain was getting worse and he needed to get away from there. The man took the sword and walked behind him. Swinging his hand, he ordered the prey to be given to him. The main character looked back. He hit him in the face with a frying pan. Holding his face, the guy wondered how this happened and why he became a victim. He noticed that the main character is strong and his movements are very fast. Xiao looked at the screen, on which he saw that his task was to transfer the loot to a stranger. He was dumbfounded by this. Turning around, he looked at the bald guy. The guy sat on the ground and cried. The main character stood over him. Holding the bird in his hands, Xiao asked if the stranger needed the sparrow. The surprised guy started shouting that he wanted him. The main character gave him the sparrow. The man smiled at this. Xiao looked at the screen and saw that the task was completed. A white sheet of paper was flying towards a table in a dark room. He was heading towards the printing machine on the table. A piece of paper flew into the car. The machine began to print on paper that the task was to transfer the loot to a stranger, and for completing the task, he was rewarded with a basic profile skill which allows him to study the abilities of other people. Closing his eyes, the protagonist thought about the skill acquisition profile and whether he could use this to learn other people's skills. The guy cried and said that Zio was a good person. The main character looked at him out of the corner of his eye. He snatched the sparrow and declared that he would never get it even if he wanted it. The guy looked after Zio as he ran away. The enraged stranger screamed that this world was definitely heading into the abyss. Sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Zio walked through the dense forest. The main character covered his head from the sun. Beads of sweat ran down his face. He approached the dark gate. Many birds flew over the fortress. Cloudy skies enveloped the settlement. The main character walked among a crowd of people. Many passers-by looked at him with dissatisfaction. They whispered that Zio was back with his prey. Zio looked at them with a dissatisfied face. He grabbed his sword. A man with an angry face walked towards him. The main character narrowed his eyes. A grin appeared on the man's face. The guy grabbed him by the shoulder. With a serious look, he asked the stranger not to contact the main character. They looked after Zio. The guys looked at him and said that he was completely sick. Steam was coming from the high wall. The main character was heading towards a high wall. He approached a small hut. Having placed the bird on the table, Zio asked how much they would give for it. The merchant extended his hand. With a dumbfounded look, he asked to be more careful. Taking the sparrow, he said that this glass was very expensive. The main character frowned at his words. He looked at the empty shelves. The merchant began to weigh the sparrow. Smiling, he said that everything was correct and he weighed 3 jin 6 liang. Zio watched intently as the merchant cleared accounts. He said with a serious face that market prices are good now and sparrows cost 200 per jin, so the total is 700. The main character said with an embittered look that this was too little. The salesman adjusted his glasses. Shifting the scores, he stated that the maximum was 800 and there really wasn't enough meat in the fence, but everything had a price and they had to live by the rules. Zio grabbed the abacus and declared that it was almost winter, and there were few sparrows these days and below 900 was out of the question. Crossing his arms, the merchant began to quickly shake his head. The main character grabbed the bird and began to leave. The seller asked where he was going. Zio replied that he would go to Old Lai and ask his price. The merchant stood in front of him with a smile on his face and offered to negotiate, asking how much he wanted to sell it for. The main character said that first he would find out the price, and then they would return to this issue. Smiling, the seller asked if Zio wanted 900, and then agreed, adding that he did not want to delay payment for Yuan's tuition. He noted in his mind that today someone from the fence came to buy game, and he couldn't let Old Lai take advantage of it. Zio, with a straight face, clarified what the merchant said at the end. He began to tremble and asked what the price of the main character was. Smiling, Zio replied that he wanted 1,200 for the sparrow. Veins appeared on the merchant's face. The main character asked whether he agreed or not, noting that if not, then he would go to Old Lee. The seller began counting out the bills. He continued to count them with a puzzled look. Having given the money, he said that this was all there was. Having taken the money, Zio said that there was nothing wrong with it and the merchant would return it tomorrow. The main character looked up. He pointed his finger at the jacket and asked him to take it out, noting that it would be just right for Yuan. The merchant reached for his jacket with his cane. Putting it on the counter, he asked if Zio would like to buy it for himself, noting that he knew the price. For him it would cost 490. He noticed that he doesn't carry jackets very often, so if he takes one jacket now, he might end up dead in the winter. The main character replied that he was not cold. Zio's gaze fell on the medicines and he asked why anti-inflammatory medicines. The seller replied that one capsule is 210. This medicine is taken for 3 days in a row and he will give 3 capsules for him for 620 and will also give a dose of iodine as a gift. Looking at the cut on his hands, the main character asked to forget about it, adding that in winter there is usually no inflammation. After giving the jacket, the merchant asked the next time Zio catches a sparrow not to kill it, noting that there are noble people behind the wall who want to keep it for fun. The main character replied that it is possible to live, but it will be more expensive. Zio headed towards the houses. He entered the hut. His brother was sitting at the table. He said with surprise that Zio had returned. Having sat down at the table, the main character asked how things were going with his homework. The brother replied that everything was fine. He just thinks that listening to a school teacher is not as useful as following the main character on a hunt. Looking at Zio, he asked when he could watch him hunt. Looking up, the main character replied that he could be killed at any moment while hunting. He asked if he would rather go to school and study physics and chemistry than hunt. He emphasized the fact that knowledge is the most important thing and in this market town, no matter what chaos happens, no one will bother the teaching staff. Having stood up, Xiao thought that it was a pity that training was so expensive, otherwise he himself would have gladly gone to listen. Turning around, he said that he had saved some of the giblets before selling the sparrow so that they could be used to make soup. His brother saw the wound on his hand and reported it. After putting the offal into the cauldron, Xiao replied that it was just a scratch. His boiler began to steam. He put the giblets on a plate. He handed the plate to his brother and asked him to eat these giblets. Pushing the plate away, he replied that he would not and that the main character should eat, noting that he needed to recover. Xiao replied that he was not hungry. Yuan began to cry and said that he would not eat, adding that it was not some kind of scratch at all and he heard that 2 days ago someone died from an infection. Putting the plate on the table, the main character said that tears are useless and his brother understands that he cannot shed tears in this world, and this world has not believed in tears for a long time. He pointed his finger towards the street and asked Yuan to look at the people around them. He asked what would happen if someone came at night and stabbed them to death because Yuan didn't eat enough. Xiao stated that he sent him to school because he had the ability for it, and if he studied well, he would not have to go into the wasteland early in the morning to earn a living like him. Yuan sat down at the table. He started eating the offal. The main character patted him on the head and said that usually when they go out, Yuan is damn smart and cunning, but as soon as they get home, he acts like a crybaby. Xiao asked him to try on the new jacket when he finished eating. Looking at the main character, Yuan asked where his jacket was. Smiling, Xiao said that he wanted to rest. The frying pan was empty. Lying on the bed, the main character thought about the palace that he saw today. He frowned. Xiao suddenly opened his eyes. He began to look around. He saw the dark palace again. The main character noted in his thoughts that the palace had appeared again. He entered it. Xiao began to examine the palace from the inside. He extended his hand towards the dark stream of mana. His hand began to sink into energy. He wondered if it was all in his head. The main character saw a typewriter on the table. He took a white sheet of paper. He read the sheet on which was written about the task he completed today. Xiao looked at the car with interest. Looking at it, he noted in his thoughts that it was written about justice, decency, honesty, trust, friendship, and goodwill. Taken aback, he wondered if they were telling him that he needed to be a good person in a world where morality was a luxury. Looking at the table, he declared that nothing would come of it. A lonely girl walked through the settlement. She pulled back the curtain. The stranger entered the protagonist's hut. Yuan put the blade to her throat. Yuan pointed his blade at the frightened girl. Looking at her, he paused, then asked that she was Xiaoyu's sister. Xiaoyu smiled, tilted her head and replied that Yuan was still awake. He looked at her displeasingly and then stepped aside. Then the girl approached him and, smiling, asked where Xiaosu was. She heard that he was wounded. Approaching the dim fire, Yuan sheathed his blade and replied that the sparrow had wounded him in the arm. Hearing this, the girl nervously folded her hands and looked ahead. She saw the guy lying on the bed, and then she lowered her head. Yuan walked over to the table, put his hands on it, and then raised his head and said that she was 8 years older than his brother, so she didn't need to get so attached to him. Xiaoyu, blushing, shouted that he was a little tomboy. She thought of them as brothers. After these words, she stepped aside with her head down. Yuan looked at the walls of the room with displeasure, and then suddenly the girl said that okay, she will go home. Let Yuan tell his brother that she came by when he wakes up. She began to leave the house, and he watched this event. The girl moved away. Gradually her silhouette began to blur, after which Yuan climbed over the bench, and then he left the house and sat on his knees. He took out his knife and looked around, and then suddenly he noticed something. Someone told him not to constantly bully his sister, it's not easy for her anyway. Turning around, Yuan saw the protagonist in front of him. When he saw him, he said that his sister was unclean. He saw her smoking the other day. Cigarettes are only given out in factories outside the walls. Maybe she got them from some savage. He thinks that she became close to him because Xiao could always hit his prey when hunting. Hearing this, the protagonist frowned with displeasure and looked at his brother, and then, lowering his head, he asked who was clean. Getting out of bed, he added that if someone wants to survive in this world, he will not be able to remain pure. All this is imposed by life, you just need to keep your distance from it and not bully. Yuan, looking at his older brother, replied that everything was clear to him now. The protagonist sat down next to him, and he continued to say why he couldn't sleep, couldn't he? With his hands on the floor, Xiao replied that he had something to think about. Looking around, he added that perhaps he also has some abilities. Hearing this, his brother said what he wanted to tell him. Xiao did not listen to Yuan and, interrupting him, replied that he was not quite sure yet, he needs to try it to be sure. After which he carefully examined the sky. He remembered how he was hiding with Yuan in the forest in green capes. He thought that in the city they say that some people have special abilities, but before he did not believe in it, and only after meeting Liu Yuan did he believe a little in this. That day, Yuan closed his eyes and crossed his arms and said that he hoped he could hit the prey. Seeing this, Xiao thought that his ability was this. A second later, the bird began to fall from the sky and he thought it was luck. Looking at the dead crow, he continued to think that, however, making a wish would have the opposite effect, and there would always be some minor illnesses and disasters. Suddenly, Ewan extended his hand upward and pointed his finger at the sky, saying that there were falling stars. Many stars were falling from the sky. Zio frightenedly grabbed Ewan's hands and shouted that he should not make a wish because suddenly it would come true again. Zio was sitting with his hands behind his head when suddenly his brother asked what he thought, why shooting stars fly so fast, that if someone is late to make a wish, to which the protagonist replied that what should he think? They fly quickly because he doesn't want to hear any of their wishes. We are transported the next day to a small building. A man with glasses appears in front of us, with children sitting next to him. He says that they will talk about technology in the era of civilization. Opening the book, he adds that they know what the term technology means. Ewan, covering his mouth with his palm, yawns and replies that he doesn't know what the teacher is saying, so then he should be silent and listen carefully. Zio watches this process through the window, and the teacher continues to say that he will use this example to explain to them what technology is. After looking at the book, he turns to the board. Zio, standing on his toes, carefully looks out the window and listens to the teacher. How suddenly he closes the book. And, looking at the class, he says that they have had enough for today, they need to go home and eat. Afterwards, he narrows his eyes and looks to the side, his gaze is drawn to an empty small window. Suddenly the protagonist turned to the side, the teacher told him that from this day on he could. Zio entered the classroom and bowed, and the man in front of him added that he could stand and listen to the lesson at the door, but he was not allowed to enter the classroom, to which the protagonist responded well. He raised his head and, smiling widely, added that he was very grateful. A plate of soup appears in front of us, with steam coming out of it. The teacher brings it to his lips. Suddenly Zio appears in front of him, holding out a cigarette for him and shouting that he is grateful that he was allowed to stand at the door and listen to the lesson. The man, taking the cigarette in his hands, examined it carefully, and Zio, contentedly placing his hands on his belt, said that he allowed him to listen to the lesson at the door, so he had to show his gratitude, since he had not paid for the training. The teacher struck a match, and then he slowly brought it to the cigarette and set it on fire. Raising his head, he released a large cloud of steam. Looking at his student, he said that in their turbulent times, there were not many students who listened as intently as he did to why he enjoyed attending class so much. The protagonist, looking around, answered, placing his hand on his chin, that learning something new would never be a bad thing, and teachers also enjoy the greatest respect in this hectic world. Then he put his hand forward and pointed his finger at a small bed of vegetables and said that no one would dare steal, for example, the vegetables in their yard right here. He was right. Hearing this, the teacher began to cough, taking in bad smoke. Looking at this, Zio said that he had been worried about one question for a long time. The teacher looked to the side in surprise and told him to ask. Zio imagined a huge city under a purple dome in his head and said that the teacher said that before the disaster, many technologies were available to humanity. Squinting his eyes, he added that why did it all disappear? His interlocutor, releasing another cloud of smoke, replied that this was due to the lack of offspring. Looking ahead, he added that in the post-disaster period, humanity was lucky to survive. How could it worry about learning? Hearing this, Zio asked that it is always possible to retain some information, to which the teacher narrowed his eyes and answered yes. And then he looked at the high walls and added that only this information is in the hands of a few. Zio turned to the wall, looked at her dissatisfiedly, and then said that the information was behind her. After taking a few steps and clenching his fist, he asked that in that case, why don't they destroy the wall? Spreading his hands to the sides, he added that most animals are afraid to attack people while they live together. Even without this wall, wolves will not dare to take a step. Not to mention the fact that the destruction of the wall would allow a lot of technology to be released so that civilization could be restored. Hearing this, the teacher pressed himself tightly to the cigarette and inhaled the smoke. And then, exhaling, he said that as long as there is danger in the wasteland, the renegades will live near the wall of the shelter. He imagined in his head men working tirelessly, and added that there would be a lot of cheap labor at the wall, and the consortium behind the wall would not allow it to collapse. The bare-chested man looked at the wall and wiped the sweat from his face, at which time the teacher continued to talk about how the interested parties behind the wall could give up this single-class barrier. After a second, he put out the cigarette and thought that he should save half to smoke next time. Then, putting it in his pocket, he said that they should stop talking and go to class, after which he thought that this guy quickly turned away so that he could hide the cigarette. Then, walking forward, he added that he would go to change his clothes smelled of smoke, and it would be bad if the students smelled it. For his sake, he said that everything was fine, that he had just inhaled this smoke, and he didn't even tell him to step aside. Hearing this, the teacher looked in front of him with displeasure. Suddenly, the protagonist looked in front of him in surprise and saw a task that said that the pursuit of knowledge is never easy, but what he is taught is what he will teach in the future. We are taken to the classroom. The teacher slowly walks to the blackboard. Zio goes inside and stands at the entrance while the other students inspect him carefully. The teacher, closing his eyes and clearing his throat, said okay, today they will take survival lessons. He, looking ahead, continued to say that they should not think that danger is far away, now their parents are protecting them, but when they become adults, they will have to learn to protect themselves on their own. Hearing this, the students looked in front of them with excitement and began to listen carefully, and the teacher continued to say that next they would talk about what to do if they encountered a wolf pack in the wild. He pointed his finger forward and added to tell him what he should do when he encounters wolves in the wild. Zio, seeing Pa pointing at him, was very surprised, and then, lowering his head on his hand, he began to think, saying that if they meet wolves in the wild, they should try to choose a hill. Hearing this, the teacher smiled contentedly, and the protagonist continued to say that with a good open view where there would be a tailwind. Extending his finger forward, Zio winked and added that such a place would be a wonderful cemetery according to Feng Shui. Hearing this, the master turned pale and stared ahead. There was complete silence in the class for several seconds, and then Zio, looking in front of him in surprise, thought that it was strange. Why the task was not completed, he didn't seem to teach anything bad. Suddenly the teacher put his hand to his mouth and cleared his throat. The protagonist, seeing this, bowed his head, and then, putting his hand forward, he imagined 3 huge wolves in his head and said that, probably, the teacher had never seen a wolf, let alone a pack. Even with a lone wolf there was practically no chance of survival, so it was better to immediately find a good place for yourself for the grave. Hearing this, the mentor looked ahead anxiously, and then he said that from now on he could sit in class and listen to lessons, and he would teach survival lessons. Zio, hearing this, smiled widely and asked what he would teach, and then thanked him. Suddenly, a system message appeared in front of his face with the message that the reward for completing the task of the first force appeared. Purple energy appeared around him and his clothes disappeared. Looking at his arms, he thought that he really felt an increase in muscle strength. Clenching his fist and furrowing his eyebrows, he continued to reflect that it seemed to him that the palace was not a figment of his imagination, it had a special power. Putting his hand to his chin, he squinted his eyes and imagined a muscular guy in his head, and then thought that if the strength value of an adult man is 3, before he had 2.5, but if he adds 1. Having looked menacingly in front of him, he continued to think that this is not more than that of an average adult. Smiling maliciously, he thought that in this way his chances of survival in the wild would become even higher. Suddenly, Yuan appeared behind him, and his voice scared the protagonist. Yuan, looking at his brother, said that what he meant was that the teacher allowed him to attend classes at school and invited him to be a teacher. Throwing his hands down, he added that maybe he wanted to make him a successor. Zio, smiling, raised his hand and said that he didn't think so, most likely he just didn't have enough cigarettes. Hearing this, Yuan turned pale and asked if he was serious, to which the protagonist went down to his younger brother and, with a wink, replied that it would be nice to be a teacher. When he gets old, he will transfer this position to him. Then he turned around and, spreading his arms, added that, in the end, wild nature was dearer to him. Yuan gritted his teeth in displeasure and lowered his head, and then thought that this always happens. He, looking displeasedly at his brother, continued to think that if he gets something good, he immediately passes it on to him. Zio, taking a few steps to the side, said that it is good to be a teacher, but this is not for him. His brother must study hard and develop every day in order to become a worthy and smart person in the future. He understands this. Having not heard the answer, the protagonist and the task did not turn around, and then, extending his hand to his brother, he asked what he was doing, let him not lag behind, to which Yuan, running up, said that he was coming. Zio looked down and smiled. We are taken to the soldiers. They walk in an even column past the heroes. One of the fighters, with his hands behind his head, said that he just wanted to take a few days off, and now he was asked to go to Mount Sing. Zio, looking at the squad with displeasure, thought that these people were mercenaries. Passing by, another fighter looked at his comrade and said exactly what. But first they need to go to Quan Fuguyu and try to find someone who can show them the way. Frowning his brows, the protagonist thought that they were going to Mount Jing. This group of mercenaries from behind the wall lacked combat experience. Isn't it just suicide to rush into the wasteland like this? Then he walked past the girl. Suddenly he turned around and looked behind him. Looking at the leaving group, he thought that this girl, she gave off the feeling of a wild animal from the wasteland. Suddenly, Yuan, standing behind his brother, asked that he thought Fugui would recommend him as a guide. Everyone in the market town knew that he was very familiar with the wilderness. The protagonist, looking ahead, replied that usually you can go to the Jing mountain area on your own 2 feet and get out of their feet first. Whoever wants to let him go, but he won't go. There is something strange in this group, so they should better avoid there. We are transported to the evening. Zio enters the tent. He is greeted by a concerned Yuan, asking if his wounds are okay. To which Zio replies with a smile that everything is fine. His brother, frowning with dissatisfaction, shouted at him not to lie to him. Last time he already tried to hold on through force. Zio, going deeper into the tent, pulled his hands up and told him not to worry, he was not going to play with his life. Suddenly they heard someone's footsteps and a voice asking if this guy really escaped from the wolves alive. Another voice replied that of course, how could he lie? Hearing outside voices, Yuan and Zio turned around worriedly, and then they suddenly fell to the ground, grabbing their weapons. They walked forward slowly. Zio walked to the door and looked out a little through the crack. He saw the guy with the gun looking at Fugui, saying that he meant that he was sick in the head. The man in front of him, rubbing his hands with a smile, replied that everything was fine. He just said casually, "It won't hurt. He is not seriously ill. They are already in place." The protagonist, frowning with dissatisfaction, thought that this Fugui really decided to bring him together with these people. A man in a red vest walked out to class in different directions and loudly told Zio to go out because he had guests. Yuan looked in front of him displeasedly and asked what he should do, to which the protagonist, turning around, replied that he would go out and let Yuan stay in the house. Zio took a few steps forward and out of the tent, extending his hand forward. Then he jumped up to Fugui and, grabbing his hands, shouted with a smile that he congratulated him on the safety of his father and son. Everyone outside looked puzzled at the guy who appeared in front of them. A fighter with an orange bandage around his neck asked what kind of father and son. He meant capital and interest. A second later, he opened his mouth in displeasure and shouted that no, this schizo is definitely sick. What kind of nonsense is this? He grabbed Fugui by the collar and, pointing his finger at Zio, shouted that yes, he was definitely sick, and he told him that everything was fine. At least he knew what would happen to him because of his lies. Afterwards, the squad began to move away, and Fugui, stretching out his hands towards them, shouted that they would allow him to explain, because Zio may be sick, but this is not at all the case. Tears flowed from Fugui's eyes. He turned to the protagonist and asked him why he wanted him dead. And then he ran to the detachment, saying that they would allow him to explain. The detachment commander shouted that he was giving him time until dawn to find a suitable person for this job. Suddenly the girl with the sniper rifle stopped, and then, turning back, she looked at Zio for several seconds. After a while she turned around and continued on her way. The protagonist noticed this and frowned, and then a bundle of paper and a system message appeared in front of him, saying that the necessary skills would be learned in a random order. He, looking in front of him in surprise, thought what random study meant. A bundle of paper appeared in front of him, which began to open, and a system message that the target's firearm skill had been accidentally copied, whether it needed to be learned. Seeing this, Zio opened his eyes wide and thought that he should learn this. A huge number of system windows appeared in front of the protagonist. In one of them a download appeared in text stating that knowledge of firearms maintenance and care of firearms, regular maintenance to prevent mold, corrosion and rust, and to ensure for functionality, you need to check the magazine, chamber, external deformation, operability, accessories, and cartridges. Looking at the system messages, Zio thought that these were all firearms skills, which meant that he could really copy someone's abilities. After he closed his eyes, a system message appeared in front of him that he had achieved success in training. He had mastered advanced skill in using firearms. Opening his eyes, he looked in front of him in surprise, saying that unless what he received was a basic level scroll, why did he learn advanced firearms mastery? After that, he went to a large system message and, poking his finger at it, received information that there are two types of skill copy scrolls. A basic level scroll allows him to learn any skill up to an advanced level. A master scroll allows him to learn other people's master skills as soon as he will reach an advanced level in one of his own skills, and also has a chance to learn the target's supernatural abilities. After seeing this, he thought that he can even learn other people's supernatural abilities. This is generally normal. An image of a girl appeared in front of him in the system message, and he asked that he could find out the firearms proficiency level of that girl. He looked in front of him in surprise and thought that she was fluent in firearms, but why was she serving in a private army? Something is really wrong with this group. He then narrowed his eyes and scratched the back of his head in puzzlement. Suddenly he turned around, hearing his brother's screams. Yuan grabbed him by the cape and asked why he was looking at the back of this girl all this time. Suddenly someone came out of the tent and asked whose back it was. Turning around, they saw Zio coming towards them. Looking at her, Zio opened his mouth in shock and asked what she was doing here. The girl straightened her hair with a smile and said that she had swapped with a family of 3 who lived here before, and in the future she would move here and live next door to them. Hearing this, Yuan clung to his brother and asked in a whisper that he was still a virgin, because Zio spent a lot of money on this. She used to live in a stone brick house. Hearing this, Zio annoyedly grabbed his younger brother by the hair and shouted that he was already old enough. So it's time for him to talk about this aspect of your education. To which Yuan said that it's good if he doesn't know something, just let him will ask. Zio waved to Zioyu with a smile after these words, and then they headed towards the tent, and the protagonist added that he really had something to do with something, and not now they were barely staying afloat, so he shouldn't try to connect them with his sister. Suddenly he saw something in front of him. Ewan stopped and extended his finger forward, saying that he should just look at those 2 potatoes hidden under the chair and what looked like 3 pills. Looking under the table, Ewan added that it was to treat his arm injury. Bending down, Zio grabbed the bottle of pills and looked at it and said that it was indeed an anti-inflammatory drug. Looking ahead, he added that whether his brother remembered how last year he encountered wolves and was injured, someone secretly planted them some pills to keep him alive, right? Picking up the bottle of pills, he added that the place where the pills were planted was exactly the same as now he was trying to find this person. Ewan, looking at his brother, said that his sister could not do this, he only told her about his injury this time. Zio narrowed his eyes and looked ahead. Suddenly, behind the tent, someone grabbed Zioyu's hand and pulled out a cigarette for her, saying that she moved here and he brought her a cigarette, to which Zioyu replied that she would no longer do such things. Ewan and Zio turned to the exit in fear as they heard a man's voice laugh and then shout that she would eat and drink if she didn't do such things, who would give her a cigarette. The protagonist grabbed his dagger. Meanwhile, the guy tore Zioyu's clothes and she raised her head and screamed for him to let her go. Zio, gritting his teeth, jumped out of the tent like lightning. Looking ahead with dissatisfaction, he saw a system message that he had a new task to help. Squinting his eyes, he thought that even without this task he would have helped. Then, grabbing his dagger, he made a quick dash forward. The man in front of him looked ahead in fear, and then, smiling, he thought that the little guy with the bone knife wanted to stab him. Then he took out a huge machete and, smiling, thought that he had real iron here. Suddenly, in a second, Zio's machete cut him into 2 pieces. The man looked at his broken blade in fear and shouted that how was this possible? The protagonist then let go of his dagger, and, grabbing the scoundrel's hand, he hit him in the stomach with all his might. Then, literally in a second, he went behind his back and began to break his arm. And then at great speed he hit his face on the floor. Blood flowed from the man's face. He clenched his teeth in displeasure and thought about how old he was and how he could be so strong. Zio then looked at the frightened Zioyu and asked who he was, to which she replied that he was a foreman at a coal mine. She imagined in her head how several men were killing a guy, and then said that last night a man was stabbed alive in the market town, and he took the lead because he heard that this man had a habit of saving money, and so it turned out that he owed the casino money, and so he decided to do this. Zio looked displeasedly at the foreman, and then he picked up the broken machete tip from the floor. Raising his attacker's hand, he grabbed the dagger and looked at him menacingly. Suddenly a system message appeared in front of him that he had a new task: he must leave the enemy alive. A second later, the protagonist cut the attacker's side, and he screamed in pain. The foreman, cringing in pain, pulled his hand towards the cut, and meanwhile Zio, rising to his feet, said that he had about 3 minutes left. Looking down, he added that if he went to the clinic in the market town and got stitches, he might be able to survive. The foreman, gritting his teeth, slowly began to rise to his feet, and then, leaving bloody footprints on the floor, he ran towards the trading city. A system message appeared in front of the protagonist that the task had been completed. The reward was a basic scroll of copying skills. Since he now lacks weapons, he begins to complete a side task. Looking at these system windows, he thought that the first task should be to rescue Zioyu. He can't believe that he finished the second one. How did the damn palace make a decision? Afterwards, Ewan approached him and asked that he would simply let him go if he recovered and took revenge on him. He was not a good person. To which the protagonist, smiling, replied that he really still thought that the clinic in their trading city would heal his wounds. Ewan smiled and exhaled, answering that seeing him so ruthless made him feel relieved. Zio then pulled his hand towards the broken blade. Picking it up from the floor, he looked around. He saw Zioyu standing nearby with his head down. Then suddenly she raised her eyes when she heard Zio ask her if she could quit smoking. The girl, looking worriedly ahead, nodded her head several times. Zio began to walk forward, saying that these cigarettes are not very addictive, but as he knows, they add poppy seeds. Strike the floor with your blade. He added that Van also said that their share was very small. Stopping, he added that she could quit if she wanted. Then he grabbed his head and, closing his eyes, added that he wanted to clarify something. Although he was very handsome, it was impossible between them. Zioyu looked at him, puzzled, and then she said that she just treats him like a brother. The protagonist scratched the back of his head with a smile and, laughing, said that this was it. It turned out awkward. A second later, he grabbed his younger brother and, running to the side, shouted that this is what his stupid talk was leading to. Zioyu, watching this, covered her mouth with a smile and laughed. Suddenly a dark space appears in front of us, around which there are many bookshelves. In the center there is a table with a typewriter. Characters are quickly typed on the keyboard, and a message appears on the sheet that a side quest has been opened. The protagonist, smiling, thought that the side quest was a little interesting. A hand lifted a piece of paper over the table. The main character held a piece of paper in front of him. When he began to read the contents, he thought that the task was related to weapons and decided that it would be nice to get a new one. On the parchment it was written that since he lacked weapons, a side quest was opened, which was that he must receive 100 sincere thanks in order to unlock the weapon, and that also thanks could be used to exchange for items. Zio pursed his lips and looked down when he became indignant at the need to collect thanks, and sincere ones at that. The guy's attention was caught by another sheet of paper in the typewriter. It was written on the parchment that one thank you had been received from Zioyu, and that the unlocking of the weapon was 1/100th. Then the main character thought that the palace was quite accurate in its judgment, so he was glad that he saved not an insensitive person. The demon inside the guy rubbed his hands as he thought that it was a pity that instead of gratitude one couldn't collect negative emotions. Otherwise he would have tried so that in just a few minutes the whole city would be filled with negativity in his direction. Yuan was sitting at a table with a candle burning on it. Zio sat on the bed and asked the boy to thank him. Yuan opened his mouth slightly, sweat appeared on his face. He asked his brother what was wrong with him, since he asked so suddenly that the boy was already a little scared. Zio bared his sharp teeth and appeared behind the boy as he told him to speak up and not be afraid. Long dark hair covered his eyes as Yuan thanked the boy for always taking care of him. The main character smiled, clenched his fist in front of him and thought that he did not expect it to be so easy when a system notification appeared that he had received gratitude from the boy. Zio put his elbow on the table, rested his chin on his hand, and asked his brother to say thank you again. Sweat appeared on the boy's face as he weakly thanked the main character. Zio raised his hands to the place where the system alert should have appeared and did not understand why he did not receive anything this time. He pointed his finger at the boy and told him that he had not thanked him sincerely, and asked him to be sincere next time, and then added that sincerely meant it was from the bottom of his heart, and asked his brother to do it again. Yuan, sitting at the table, exclaimed words of gratitude, and Zio, standing next to him, told him that he was putting little feeling into it and ordered him to repeat it. The boy folded his palms in front of him and drawled out the word thank you. The main character crossed his arms over his chest, shook his head and replied that this was still wrong, and that first of all he should experience emotions. Suddenly Zio stretched his hand forward, smiled broadly and said that it worked this time and that he needed to do it again. Tears flowed down the boy's cheeks. He did not answer. A cartoon appeared with Zio and his brother with the caption that 2,000 years had passed. Yuan put his head on the table and asked the main character sitting on the floor if this was his ability, and then said that his abilities had a bad effect on his voice, and Zio at that moment was thinking that after half a night of work, he only got one sincere thanks. The guy grabbed his head with both hands and said that he needed to come up with something else. 2 coins fell onto the wooden table. The main character put his hands on the table and looked up. He took the coin in his hand and looked at it. It turned out that there was a heart on it. On the back was an inscription that she was grateful to him for being with her all her life and for giving her the courage to be who she was, and that she was grateful for what he shared with her as her destiny, and for the flowers that bloom and fall, and the promise that she will cherish them all. Zio raised his hand with the coin to his face as the melody enveloped him. The guy looked back, where there was some movement. He turned around and saw a large metal device behind him. The main character came up and began to examine it while he was thinking about what it was for. Zio saw 2 narrow holes. He looked down and thought about trying to throw a coin there. The guy raised his hand to the slot and placed a coin there. At the bottom of the device there was a shelf into which a black jar fell. The main character took it in his hand, looked at it and thought that it was medicine. That's what it said on the jar, and Zio continued to look at it and wonder if it was possible to tell what the medicine was for. Suddenly the guy opened his mouth and eyes wide. He found himself at home in front of the table at which Yuan was sitting. The boy opened his mouth wide and turned to his brother, asking what kind of magic he had done and why a small jar suddenly appeared in his hand. The main character was trying to open the medicine bottle while he was thinking that since there was only one word written on this medicine bottle, could it be a panacea? He used his fingers to remove the black contents from the jar and decided that it was worth a try anyway. Zio sat down, closed his eyes and brought his fingers with the ointment to the wound. He applied medicine to the cut. The guy gritted his teeth and thought that this was reckless because this substance could be poison. Suddenly, the main character's eyes widened when he realized that the wound no longer hurt. Zio grinned as he held the jar in his hand and thought that the anti-inflammatory medicine needs to be taken for 3 days in a row, but this cream works in one go, and that one anti-inflammatory medicine costs 200, which means that the cost of the ointment, if rounded up, is 100 millions. It was then that the guy decided that he had to figure out how to get as many thanks as possible. A crowd of children stopped at the entrance to the building early the next morning. Two pairs of shoes stopped at a wooden fence. The man with glasses worriedly asked the guys in front of him what happened to them. Zio and Yoon stood with black eyes and their mouths slightly open when the youngest began to talk about what his brother wanted to do. The main character smiled broadly, pinched his brother's cheek, and replied that they were fine, they just didn't sleep well. The man with glasses opened his mouth and asked him if he had thought about what he would say today, because today was his first day as a teacher, to which the guy replied not to worry. The man in the tattered cloak touched his hand to the wooden table while he thought about how they need to find a way to collect a whole bunch of thank you coins, but he doesn't know how to do it. Zio spread his arms out to his sides as the crowd of children sitting in front of him greeted their new teacher. The main character came up with an incredible idea. His hand, wrapped in black tape, reached forward when the guy asked them about how they think it is difficult for teachers to give lessons. The guy closed his eyes and said that everyone can sit in the classroom, but the teacher stands all day. The children began to chatter when they were asked if they should thank the teacher and responded positively. The gray-haired man adjusted his glasses and nodded. In his heart, Zio smiled broadly when in reality he seriously said that from now on, instead of greeting, the children would thank the teacher, but he thought that he had cleverly come up with the idea that the students would thank him. The main character extended his hand in front of him when the children bowed their heads and told the students to try to do it all together because now is the beginning of the lesson. The guy looked up and thought about why nothing was happening, and how none of these little brats sincerely thanked the teacher. He touched the back of his head with his hand, closed his eyes and agreed that 9 times out of 10 life doesn't go according to plan, so he decided to come up with something else. The stone wall near the treetops was shrouded in fog. Zio stood at the board and drew an animal's face on it while he talked about how today they would talk about basic survival skills in the wild. One student began to yawn, and the other opened his mouth and looked forward. Another student gritted his teeth and touched his face with his hand while Zio was talking about how rabbits in the wild do not attack people, and that they are about the height of a person's shin, and have great strength, and the boy was thinking that this guy is too talks a lot and that he still hasn't finished the lesson. The main character smiled while he talked about how the children should be more careful because it is very difficult to survive in the wasteland. One student raised his hand and turned to the teacher, saying that if he did not finish the lesson, it would get dark outside and it would no longer be safe to return home. Zio nodded as his hand with the chalk froze at the blackboard. He closed his eyes and raised his hand as he said that safety comes first, and then ended the lesson. A crowd of people ran out of the building into the street, shouting thanks to the teacher. Coins began to fall onto the wooden table. The main character beamed and smiled when he thought that the effort was paying off. He was touched that due to such a long lesson, the students were grateful to him. Yoon was walking next to Zio when he asked him not to delay his lessons so much in the future. The main character closed his eyes and replied that he was ready to give his life for education, and asked what was wrong with being delayed a little. Yoon clenched his teeth and said that he could not continue like this because he would destroy the youth of their country. Zio grabbed his younger brother by the head and asked him what he might know because the guy received the coins, which means that the student's gratitude was sincere. The boy opened his eyes wide, pointed his finger forward and told his brother to look there. There was a crowd of people ahead. One man smiled widely while the main character was thinking that isn't it old man Liu, and that he went to be a guide. A man with glasses approached the guys and addressed Zio. He adjusted his glasses, opened his mouth and told him that he was a heartless little wolf to whom he recommended such a good job, but he did not agree. The main character opened his mouth, looked away and asked how he knew it would be a good job. The man with glasses grinned and replied that there are poor and noble people behind the walls of the shelter, but the poor will not be able to get out of there, and that these people who have free access to the territory of the shelter must be noble people. There was a high stone wall behind the guy when Zio realized that it was blocking not only the people outside, but also the people inside. He opened his eyes wide and looked to the side as he thought about how those inside the walls have a hard time getting out, but those outside are desperately trying to get inside by any means necessary. The man with glasses smiled and touched Zio as he said that he had heard from the staff that they were looking for a good guide from the trading city to take him beyond the wall so that they could use his services, and asked the guy about when else would he have it was such a wonderful opportunity. The main character looked to the side and remained silent when Yuan asked him why he didn't talk to those guys from the group again, because he was much better than that old man Liu. Zio turned his back to the bespectacled man and the boy and told him to get it over with and that it was time for them to go home. Near the door there was a wooden sign with hieroglyphs. Yoon pointed his finger to the side and tugged at his brother's cloak as he turned to him and asked if Sister Zioi was there. A girl with long hair spoke to a man through the window and said that her earrings were worth a lot of money, so could he give her more, and she was told that she didn't really need to sell things, because she could just become. At this point, he was interrupted by Zio, who put money in Zioi's hand and said that she didn't need to sell anything, because it was money for 3 anti-inflammatory pills, The girl's hand clenched the money as the guy replied that he was going to buy the medicine anyway, so she could take it, and that he didn't reject her kindness, but they shouldn't be so polite to each other in the future. The main character hit himself on the chest with his fist and said that if it weren't for the medicine that she gave them, he probably would have died, and that she didn't need to worry, because now, as long as he had meat, he would make sure that she had soup. Yuan touched his brother and told him in his ear that he had pronounced it wrong, because they usually eat meat together. But he said that while he eats meat, she will eat soup, and then the boy added that they don't have meat at home now. Standing behind him, Yuan nodded as Xiao looked determinedly and asked to be allowed to say differently. The protagonist pointed his finger at Xiao and exclaimed that in the future, if he has a full bowl of soup, then she will always have a bowl to wash it. The girl smiled, closed her eyes and replied that from now on she would wash the dishes and laundry for him. The man knelt down and began to beg the doctor to help his family. A man in a white coat stood next to the wounded guy while the man at his feet talked about how their family could not survive without him. The man looked down and asked what was the point of visiting a doctor if they couldn't afford it. Xiao and Yuan stood and watched as the door slammed shut in front of the kneeling girl. The main character opened his mouth, turned to his brother and said that he should remember this, because in front of him is their reality. Drops of rain began to hit the roofs when a voice said that acid rain was coming and that they should go home quickly. The girl and two guys ran in different directions, trying to hide from the rain. Yuan turned his head to Xiao and said that it is very easy for doctors to receive gratitude, because they all thanked the old doctor when he was still here. The main character lowered his hand when his brother said that it was a pity that he didn't know anything about medicine. The guy asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Xiao's eyes widened when he thought that even if he didn't know how to heal, he could learn. A piece of paper appeared above the typewriter when the main character added that if he became a doctor, he would be able to earn money and receive gratitude, and thus solve two problems at once. The door that led into the building was illuminated by the sun. Xiao sat against the wall of the house with a sign and thought that he didn't know what time the clinic usually opened, but it wouldn't hurt to come early. The clock struck 2 o'clock in the afternoon when the guy wondered if it was time for him to show up. The door opened slightly. The man in the robe came out, stretching and yawning. Suddenly, he opened his eyes wide and screamed. He stood on one leg next to the guy sitting on the ground and asked him what he was doing here, squatting, and Xiao told him to mind his own business and not pay attention to him. The man in the robe touched the door and said that if he wanted to see a doctor, he had to bring money, and that without it he could sit here all day. A piece of paper appeared in front of the main character, and he laughed when a system notification appeared that the target's skill would be learned at random. The guy's hand squeezed the sheet. An alert popped up asking if he wanted to learn the target's skill called Deception, which was randomly selected. The paper disappeared from Xiao's hand. He opened his eyes and mouth wide and thought that he was here to learn medicine, and that there was no point in learning Deception, and also that this random skill was too random. The main character turned his head and gritted his teeth as he thought about how this guy was so disgusting that he had a skill in Deception. The man in the robe was holding something in his hands when he turned his head and looked towards the guy. Sweat appeared on his face. He opened his eyes wide when he remembered that he knew Xiao, and thought that it was not for nothing that he seemed familiar to him, and that he was a well-known cruel guy in the city. The man was scared when he did not understand what he wants from him, because he didn't contact him. The main character pointed his finger at the system window in front of him and wondered what level of medicine this doctor had. In response, a message came with the words that from the information about the target it is known that he does not have any medical skills. Xiao clenched his fist and gritted his teeth as he protested that how could he be a doctor without medical skills. The guy threw a frying pan at the head of a man in a white coat and shouted at him that he had been making money from fraud all these years. The man began to cry and told the guy not to talk nonsense and that he was not deceiving anyone. Xiao turned around and walked away from the man in the white coat, holding the frying pan and touching his face with his hand, thinking that he would have to think again about how he could become a doctor without studying medicine. He looked at his hand and realized that the wound was almost healed. The guy remembered the metal device and smiled when he realized that he could heal cuts. The main character entered the house and asked Sister Xiaoyu what she was doing here. The girl was sitting on the bed and holding a black thing in her hands when she said that she saw that the clothes he was wearing were torn, and therefore came to sew them up for him. Yuan was carrying a plate in his hands as he passed by Xiao when he asked what he had in his hands, and he replied that it was Sister Xiaoyu who had prepared the porridge for them. The main character pinched his younger brother's neck and asked him if he had said thank you to the girl, to which Yuan replied that he had not said so yet. The boy bowed and thanked Xiaoyu, and the girl jumped up and told Xiao not to hit his brother, to which the boy replied that he could be spoiled with him, but he couldn't be like that with others. The girl sat down by the fire and put food on a plate while she told the main character standing next to him that it was time to eat because they were still growing. The guy opened his eyes wide and beamed when he thought that they had never been told that they were still growing. The girl handed Xiao the soup and told him to take the food and sit at the table. The guys bring the plates to their mouths with both hands. The main character looked at the sewn item and said that his sister knew how to sew very well, and then asked why she didn't come and help them when they opened a clinic for treating cuts. Things were lying on the table when a voice asked why he suddenly wanted to open such a clinic. The moon was shining above the house and the stars were shining when he replied that she would know about it when the time came. Zio lay next to his brother with his hands behind his head. He closed his eyes. The guy opened the door saying that it was time to look at what he had received over the past few days. There were 3 coins in his hand when he said that he had exchanged his gratitude coins for a bottle of black medicine yesterday, and that he now had 3 left. The main character sat down on the table, smiled and said that 1 gratitude is equal to 1 jar of black medicine, and 1 jar is enough for 3 people, and then added that in this case 1 and 3 is the right decision. He held the bottle in his hand while he thought that the more black bottles he bought, the more gratitude coins he would receive, and that he might be able to unlock his weapon faster. He turned his face to the wall when he decided it was time to sleep. The boy stood next to the girl, waving to his brother and asking him to be careful. Zio smiled and thought that those who take risks will definitely get what they deserve. While the pick was breaking the ground, he thought that tall trees are always the first to be blown by a strong wind. The man who was dripping with sweat turned his head to the side when the main character was thinking about what needs to be done so that people don't think that he wants to deceive them. The man opened his mouth and asked Zio what he was doing here, and then assumed that he was cutting the grass here. The guy crouched down and tried to pull out the plant while he thought that since he already had the medicine, he should cut a few blades of grass. He turned his head and grinned as he explained that it was to give the appearance of being a herbalist and not to come under suspicion. Zio approached the man with the herb and said that it was not a weed, but a medicinal herb, and when he asked again, the guy replied that if you add the herbs in different proportions and boil them, they can be used to heal wounds, and then he asked the man what he thinks about how the main character recovered from his previous injuries. The man opened his eyes wide and assumed that the guy endured everything by willpower. Several people stood at the entrance to the house. Zio sat by the fire and looked at the crowd outside. He opened his mouth and smiled. Men on the street stood and discussed among themselves. Birds were flying over the roof of the house. The main character gritted his teeth and looked away irritably when he thought about why no one was asking anything. The guy went out into the street and pointed his finger at someone from the crowd. The man pointed to himself and asked again, to which he was told to come over. He turned to look at the crowd as Zio stood in front of him. The main character hugged the man and told him to ask him what he was doing. The man opened his mouth and asked him a question. Zio smiled sweetly. He pointed to the dishes on the fire and replied that he was making an herbal medicine that not only had anti-inflammatory and analgesic properties, but also quickly healed wounds, and that he had previously hidden this from everyone. There was grass in the water when the guy exclaimed that today he finally realized his mistake and decided to share it with them. The men began to discuss among themselves that everyone knew that he simply endured everything out of character, and that no one would believe that he could treat anyone. When Zio exclaimed that he was going to open a clinic for treating cuts and called them to his place if someone will get hurt. When people turned away and began to leave, the main character thought that this was not normal, that no one cared about him. A man suddenly approached the guy. Zio saw his bandaged hand. He grabbed it and asked the man if he had injured his hand while working, and if he wanted to get excellent medicine. He was told that he didn't need anything. The main character put the man against the wall, holding a can in his hand, told him to just think of it as an advertisement, and said that this time he would cure him for free. The guy waved to the man running away from him. When he entered the house, Ewan asked him why he was giving out medicine for free. Zio gritted his teeth and replied that he should not ask, and that next time it would be better to die than to repeat this, but thought that the beginning is always difficult, and that he should control himself because those who achieve great things achievements do not pay attention to little things. Birds flew over the stone wall the next morning. When Zio left the house, someone was waiting for him on the street. The main character opened his eyes wide and asked the man what he was doing here so early, because he hasn't been going out to catch sparrows lately. Old man Wang with glasses smiled widely and asked the guy if he had cured Tedu from the eastern part of the city yesterday. The main character closed his eyes when he learned the man's name. The guy crossed his arms and replied that he worked without intermediaries when Wang asked him if he still had the medicine and suggested that Zio give it to him and he would sell it. The man with glasses beamed, smiled widely and replied that he could sell him some then, and the guy said that he didn't seem to be injured. Wang raised his hand in front of him and said that yesterday Tedu felt that something was wrong and wanted to know what kind of ointment the main character gave him, and decided to taste it. At that moment sweat appeared on Zio's face and he asked if this black medicine could be taken orally. The man's glasses flashed when he said that Tedu took this black ointment and tumbled with his wife all night, and then asked the main character how much of this medicine he had and where he got it. Zio closed his eyes and replied that he inherited it. The guy looked at the man with glasses, grinned and asked why he, a bachelor, needed this ointment. Van smiled and replied that the guy should not worry about it, and the main character put his hand in front of him and said that the price of introduction was 600. They put money in his hand and thanked him when a system notification appeared that he had received gratitude from a man with glasses. Zio looked after the smiling man indifferently. There was fog at the gate to the building. Van held a black jar in his hands and smiled. He handed the medicine to the man in the black suit, saying that he had brought this thing. An overhead view of the wooden shacks, Zio standing in front of the sign on his house. On the sign in front of the hero there is an inscription that this is a clinic for the treatment of cuts. The hero looks at it with pleasure and is glad that it is finally opening. 3 pairs of male legs, blood dripping on the ground, someone complaining that he can't do it anymore and that he's in damn pain and can't run anymore. 3 wounded villagers, one is bleeding from his arm, another is holding his shoulder, and the third is holding his leg. The man in the center, in a purple shirt, says that they need to hurry. The hero notices men passing by who are heading towards the charlatan's clinic. A man in a white jacket happily notes that they are already near the clinic. Zio's eyes begin to shine when he realizes that these are his first clients. A task window appears that says that the hero needs to save 3 patients. Zio thinks that he did not expect the first patient so soon. Zio puts his hand on his head, sighing and asking for an apology. He runs up with a sharp jerk towards the men, who have not even had time to notice him yet, grabs them from behind, jumping on them. The hero throws the wounded near his hut, tying them up. A man in a purple shirt, lying on the ground, asks the hero what he wants. MC stands with a serious face against the sky and says that the doctor at the clinic they were going to see is a charlatan, and he is trying to save their lives. Zioyu leaves the house, looking at what is happening. The hero shouts to her that they have patients to treat. The lady approaches the lying men, asking what happened and whether they got involved in a group fight. A man in purple, holding his stomach, explains with pain in his voice that the boiler at the factory exploded and that they were lucky to escape with minor injuries and were able to run to them on their own, but someone died on the spot. An exploded boiler, mountains of corpses lying on the ground, smoke coming from everywhere. The hero thinks that in their times, if someone gets hurt, then no one will run to save someone for free. The gloomy face of the hero is close up. He continues his thought, thinking that most likely people will wait for your death and take away what belonged to you. The hero with a satisfied face holds the purple man and looks at his sister, telling her that she first needs to disinfect the needles and sew up the wounds of the men. The sister asks what it means to sew, to which the hero calmly replies that it is like sewing up clothes and it is not difficult. With worry on her face, Zioyu straightens her hair and says that she is ready to do it. The needle warms up in a woman's hand over a candle. The sister inserts a hot needle into the man's arm. The man screams in a frenzy of pain. His whole face is distorted. He turns to Zioyu and shouts that he can understand that she heated the needle to sterilize it, but couldn't she have waited for the needle to cool down before stitching? MC replies with a happy face that everyone makes mistakes sometime. Their nurse is not entirely familiar with the process on her first day and will get better with time. MC sticks his fingers into the medicine, about to take some from the jar, and says it's time for the medicine. The hero with a predatory face turns to the men, saying that his medicine is very valuable, but he will not charge them much and that it will cost them the same as in the clinic, namely 600. Zio hugs the man, holding his medicated fingers over his shoulder. He says that for his work the man gets 2,000 or 3,000 a month, so he should be able to pay 600 for his life. The man, clearly afraid of the hero, says that I agree, the hero just needs to go easy on him. One of the patients stands up from his seat with a sharp movement, preparing to run. He runs out of the shack, attracting the attention of his colleague and hero, who says that escaping from his clinic is not so easy. The man in the gray shirt is also about to give up, but the hero grabs him by the shoulder, saying that the patient has escaped and Sister Zioyu needs to sew up the wound of the man in gray first. Zio runs out of his blade at great speed, catching up with the escapee. Zioyu, folding his arms on his chest, asks the man in gray if he also wants to run away, and if he also wants to run, then she will sew him up later, to which the man, looking down glance, replied that no, he would not run and let his sister stitch it up. An escaped man leans on some shack, breathing heavily. MC grabs the man who thought he had gotten away and says that it's good that he runs fast. The man turns around in horror, and his brain begins to work at increased speed, trying to comprehend what is happening. The hero asks how far the man is going. With a dissatisfied face, Zio towers over the man and says that it is time for them to go get treatment. The hero carries a man on his shoulder, where 2 people are already lying calmly, resting on a mattress. He says that they have returned. Zioyu sews up the hand of the man who was just brought in. He sighs, enduring the pain. The 3 of them lie on the mattress. The escapee notices that nothing hurts anymore and it seems that the medicine is really working. The task window reports that the task is completed and the hero's reward is 1 point each of strength and dexterity. A task window pops up in front of the hero, where it is written that his new task is to cure 10 patients. The hero thinks that this turns out to be a chain of tasks. Night falls and the crescent moon glows brightly above the shack. A view of a shack with a light on inside and someone shouting that something terrible has happened and that wolves have broken into the town. Zioyu and Yuen wake up and try to understand what happened. The brother asks MC if the wolves will come to the trading city. Close up of the hero's serious face, he says that wolves are smarter than you might think, so they won't risk coming to the city. The wolves surround the plant, and the hero says that they were most likely attracted by the bloody smell in the place where the boiler exploded. MC says with a straight face that after all, they have a wall standing behind them to support them. Yuen looks at his brother blankly. The view moves away and the younger brother asks how Zio survived when he met the wolves and says that he never told him that. The hero closes his eyes, thinking how to answer him. But they are distracted by a loud scream that scares them both. Someone shouts that they need to gather everyone and that no one lags behind. The hero quickly raises his hand to the burning incense in his home, while someone's voices say that the enemy has been discovered outside. MC extinguishes the candle and he and his brother stand in pitch darkness. Close up of MC's tense face. Yuen asks what is bothering his brother. The hero's back. He gloomily asks what will happen if one day the wall collapses. The sister, screaming, asks if the wall can even collapse, to which the hero replies that he doesn't know, but notes that there is nothing eternal in this world. The gates open and the wind rushes out of them in a furious stream. A crowd of armed people in camouflage uniforms, armed with rifles, emerges from the gate. Close-up of soldiers passing by shacks. The brothers peek around the corner of the door of their shack. Yuen asks if the soldiers have weapons on their backs, to which the brother replies that the younger one should not ask too many questions. Offended and dissatisfied, the younger one asks if he still has marital status in their house. Without looking back, the hero with a serious face replies that the younger one should not think about it too much, and that his place in the family is simply to live. Two soldiers walk behind each other. The one in front stretches his back, asking if they can't just go back if only a few people died in the factory, and complains that they will now have to kill wolves all night. The second soldier walking behind, shouting, replies that he should shut up, because this is a task from above and he needs to stop complaining. But the one walking in front, carefree, answers, asking what his colleague is afraid of because the officials do not hear them, and they, most likely, are still in bed with women. A close-up view of the weapon that is hanging on the soldier's back. MC thinks that his study skill is very useful and he knows everything about their weapons, and that once he can get his hands on the weapon, he will immediately be able to use it. View of the ever-retreating soldiers walking among the shacks. The hero, coming out of the corner, tells his brother that he is going to Sister Zioyu this evening and that he will return when Zio returns. Yuen shouts at his brother's back, asking where he is going. But with a sharp movement, the hero runs away from his shack without answering his brother. The quack doctor pushes, trembling all over, and thinks that something is not working. He sits with his pants down near some stone, sighing heavily. The hero runs at great speed through the shacks. He runs past the charlatan who is sitting behind a tree with a newspaper in his hands, and he notices him. Close up of the charlatan's tense face, he thinks what the hero is doing here at such a time. Zio runs to the factory, from which smoke is pouring out. Close up of the hero running, he thinks that the factory manager was armed with a gun, but he was still attacked by the wolves, and that perhaps he did not expect the wolves to come and did not have time to get his weapon. The hero's face is even closer up. He thinks that it seems to him that the pistol should still be at the factory. A view of the plant, the sky above which has turned red and is obscured by rising smoke. MC stops abruptly, noticing something, and sweat starts pouring down his cheek. The soldiers stand, holding their weapons at the ready, opposite the wolves. A mountain of bodies lies between them, and someone shouts that they need to be vigilant. Wolves are close up, their eyes glow blue, and drool flows profusely from their mouths. The soldiers, who are starting to sweat, can see that they have just fired a clip from the smoke that comes from their weapons. MC notices that the wolves are not at all afraid of bullets. People standing behind the soldiers shout at them to get down to business. A man in a business suit grabs a soldier by the shoulders and shouts for him to shoot. A shot is fired, the bullet hits the paw of one of the wolves, and a trace of pain appears on his face. The wolves look at the reader and begin to walk towards the soldiers. Immediately, many wolves jump up and attack the soldiers from above. The man who just fired the shot screams in horror. You can see how the wolf cuts the soldier's head. A huge stream of blood flies through the shadows. MC, meanwhile, begins to bypass the firefight, moving through the courtyards of the plant. Around one of the corners he sees a battle going on. Blood is spraying from someone, and the hero thinks that a private army is fighting the wolves and all the personnel have been recalled, so the side of the factory in which he is now must be safe. The hero stands with his back to the concrete slab and carefully looks out of it. There are several bodies lying behind the slab, and there is blood all over the floor. He looks at the lying body and thinks that, judging by the appearance of the bodies, the wolves killed everyone in one fell swoop, and in his thoughts he rejoices that he escaped them. Zio, with determination in his eyes, looks up and thinks that he needs to get inside and check. He looks at the tall factory building and begins to move towards it, the legs of a hero preparing to jump. MC starts jumping on boxes to climb up to the fire escape and clings to it. He begins to climb up the fire escape. He jumps onto the roof and sits down, leaning his hands on it. Standing on the roof, Zio looks around, peering into the windows on the roof to see what is below. Close up of the hero, thoughtful face, he thinks that he needs to hurry. He looks back at what is happening below, where people are fighting, and then puts on his hood. Drawing out his bone dagger, he slashes downward with the blunt end. He breaks the window below him and falls among the shards of glass, lands down on his haunches, resting his hands on the floor. Looking around and shaking off the glass shards, Zio thinks that he is finally inside. He calmly removes the hood from his head, standing among the dead bodies. The hero's back, he looks at the bodies lying on the floor here and there, and thinks that it looks like there was a battle here. But for some reason all the bodies are directed in one direction, and notices that in a critical situation, people run either to safe places or to places where weapons are stored. Few of the stairs leading down, it is covered in blood. Zio goes down the stairs, walking around the corpses, and notices some red light from below. A close-up of his face, he thinks that this is most likely a shelter in case of emergencies. A stone door with 3 red lamps on top. Under the door of the shelter lie torn bodies, some of which are leaning against the door. Zio touches the door and, not understanding himself, asks if the door is locked. He knocks on the door with his hand. He leans against the door, trying to hear something. Someone presses a button with their hand and the door begins to open slightly, which MC notices, thinking that someone is opening the door. Rushing under the door, Zio notices a man in a business suit holding a gun in his hand. He asks if a man has come here to save him. Suddenly, the man in businesslike looks changes when he realizes that the person who came here is not from the army. Zio slides in front of the man, looking at him with anger in his eyes. The man points a gun at MC, bares his teeth and shouts that it means a little thief has come to him, who took advantage of the explosion, and adds that he knows that the one who came is Zio from the trading city. The hero stands up and examines the man and realizes that it is Wang Dingyang, and asks himself if he is not the manager of the factory. Wang, with a sharp movement, keeping Zio in sight, closes the door of the shelter. Zio looks at the door as it closes and realizes that Wang wants to trap him there. He, at this time, takes the pistol in both hands and with an evil grin looks at the hero, who is looking at him with an equally evil face. MC realizes that the manager has a weapon in his hands and tightly grips his blade in his hands. The pistol is on safety. The hero notices this and a smile spreads on his face. He, in a questioning pose, raises his hands and stands at full height opposite Wang, and says that isn't Wang Dingyang in front of him. The hero begins to walk towards the manager and asks why he is here alone, to which he receives a short answer that the hero cannot come closer. The hero's face becomes so angry that the veins on his forehead begin to bulge. He shouts that the manager is crazy, and that he was the first to run into the shelter, after which he closed the door, not letting the rest of the people in. Wang, holding the gun tightly, shouts that a poor man like Zio shouldn't be asked so many questions, and continues, shouting that Zio needs to take him back to the city so he can save his life. The hero, with an evil smile, asks if the manager wants to save his life, and continues, saying that he will be afraid that he will tell the truth about how he abandoned everyone in order to survive himself. The manager begins to have a drop of sweat running down his cheek, and he doesn't stop grinning, asking how the hero knows this. Zio, with a playful face, raises his finger up and declares that no one knows his son better than his father, to which Wang is lost, not understanding what the hero is leading to. Wang, no longer grinning, but just angry, shouting, doesn't the hero think that he doesn't dare to kill him? View from above, of Wang and Zio standing opposite each other. The manager shouts that he will shoot the hero and will continue to wait for the army to arrive, and that he is a man from behind the wall, and that means that the army must come to the rescue. The hero jumps and makes a dash towards the manager, and with a dissatisfied face asks if the manager doesn't know that his weapon is on safety. The manager frantically realizes the MC's words and looks back at his gun. The hero cuts the manager's hand with a sharp blow, and the other snatches the pistol from his hand. He sharply pushes the manager towards the wall with his blow, presents the blade of his blade to the area of the manager's heart. Blood begins to flow from the latter's mouth, and he stands, frantically looking at the blade, which is stained with his blood flowing down the blade. Van, with a look full of pleading, with blood flowing from his mouth, says that he asks the hero to let him go and that he can tell him where his property is hidden. The hero, with a serious face, says that Van must speak first and then he will let him go. Van, with one eye on the blade that is moving away from him, thinks that MC is still young and that he can deceive him by simply stalling for time until the private army comes to his aid. The hero holds the blade in front of Vaughn, asking if he wants to stall for time, and continues by saying that his lungs have long been pierced by the bone knife, and even if he returns, how long does he think he will last, and states that there is no reason for the hero did not make his fate easier. With a sharp blow, MC pierces the manager's chest, causing him to scream. He sharply removes the knife from the manager's chest, shaking it off from the blood. He sits down opposite the manager's body, searching it. 2 clips in Zio's hand, he thinks that the fact that the manager had 2 extra clips was just right for him. The hero passes by the bodies, heading towards the exit, and thinks that he must get out of there as soon as possible, and that perhaps the army to rescue Wang Dingyang is already on the way. Exhaling from fatigue, Zio enters his shack. Yuan stands opposite his brother, with his arms extended towards him, and joyfully says that he has finally returned and asks if he is injured, to which Zio replies that everything is fine and asks if anything happened in the city while he was gone and whether the military returned. Yuan grabs and examines his brother's hand, saying that some of them returned with some wounded, to which the brother is indignant, saying that he shouldn't be touched and that everything is really fine with him. Zio sits down at the table and pours himself some water from the kettle. The younger one tells him that they also brought the corpses of their teammates and wild wolves, and that the remaining people are said to have continued on their way to the factory. Zio takes a sip from his glass, thinking that it seems that guns still have a deterrent effect on wolves, and that against a private army with guns, the wolves' chances of winning are still too low. Soldiers enter the settlement in cars. They get out of the car, shouting that everyone needs to get out. People come out and look at the soldiers, wondering what is happening. The soldier shouts, holding a weapon in his hands, that everyone who says who left the city today will be given a big reward. Zio and his brother look out of the shack, leaning on its door with their hand. Close up of Zio's face, he thinks why the military came to them and that he disguised the wound before leaving as if the manager was injured by a wolf, and that an ordinary person would not be able to distinguish the wounds, and thinks that maybe the military found out that Wang's gun was missing, which means they suspected something. The hero's memories of how he leaves the factory, holding a pistol in his hand. The soldiers rudely question the people, and Zio realizes that they are looking for a gun. Someone from the crowd raises his hand and shouts that he knows who came out in the middle of the night. The quack doctor shouts that it was Zio and that he saw it with his own eyes. He turns and points his finger in the hero's direction, shouting that it is him. The hero's eyes are close up, sweat begins to flow down his cheeks. The soldier points in the hero's direction, instructing his subordinates to search Zio. Old man Wang rushes out of his seat, waving his arms and shouting that Zio is the same guy that Boss Luo asked to keep an eye on over the wall, and that they can't treat him like that. The head military man asks what Old Man Wang means, to which he replies that they can ask Boss Luo themselves why he is being looked after, but he has no right to speak. The military man remembers a man with a red shirt and rings on his fingers, realizing who Boss Luo is. He raises his head to look at Old Man Wang and shouts that even if Zio is one of Boss Luo's men, then this is a serious matter and that the culprit must be found. After which he will personally go in the evening to make amends to Boss Luo and explain everything. The soldiers grab MC, they run their hands around, looking for something under his clothes, which displeases Zio. The military tries to enter the brothers' shack and Yuan, clutching a knife, shouts that they cannot enter. But the older brother looks around, shouting to him that he needs to let the military through. The younger one has a confused face and is trembling. The charlatan smiles, looking at what is happening, and grins. The soldiers enter the shack and begin to search for something in it. The younger one, looking from behind the door, watches as the soldiers throw things around in search of something. He clenches his palms and prays that they won't find anything. One of the soldiers begins to lift MC's frying pan, but the chief military man, clearing his throat, asks if they found anything. To which the soldiers look back at their boss, unanimously saying that no. One of them lifts the frying pan, not noticing a pistol in its shadow, and they say that this house is so empty that even if a pistol was hidden there, they would found it a long time ago. The main military man says that it is time for them to leave and the soldiers head out. The view from under the frying pan, under which the pistol lies, of the departing soldiers. Yuan sighs, the tension and anxiety disappearing. The soldiers stop searching the hero, and he stands with his hands raised, with a dissatisfied face. Zio looks back at the quack doctor with a displeased face, causing him to jump up. Old Man Wang comes up to Zio and tugs on his shoulder, saying that it seems to him that he shouldn't have interfered and it looks like everything is fine with them, to which MC responds with gratitude. The old man smiles, laughingly saying that if it weren't for Boss Luo's admiration for Zio, he would not have dared to stand up for him. MC looks up at the old man, asking what Boss Luo is doing and asking how he knows him. The old man, leaning close to the hero, says that Boss Luo is a representative of the consortium beyond the 113th wall and that he is simply delighted with his medicine. Zio suddenly realizes that Wang sent his black medicine right beyond the wall. Holding the hero's shoulder, the old man continues, saying that Boss Luo said that from now on, if he delivers the portion on time every month, then he will guarantee that there will be no problems in the future outside the walls. Xiao looks around, asking if Wang could talk to Boss Luo and get them behind the wall. The old man wrinkles his face with displeasure, saying that they are all polluted people and how can they get behind the wall, and asks, saying that who will collect herbs for Boss Luo in the field if MC gets behind the wall. Wang sighs, saying that he also wants to get inside, and Xiao understands that if this Boss Luo still wants to benefit from him, then he would not let him go beyond the wall. Yuan, holding his head, approaches his brother, addressing him. He grabs him by the jacket with a trembling hand, sweat streaming down it. Xiao looks back at his brother, who has already simply fallen down. He looks down in horror and screams his brother's name, realizing what happened. The hero sits on the bed, touching his hand to his brother lying next to him. Xiao frowned and looked at him, telling him not to be so stupid. He might die from this fever. He thought that his brother had made a wish again to save him and would get hit back. Yuan opened his eyes and said, "But what if something happened to him?" The girl squeezes water out of a towel. She placed it on the boy's head. He turned his head, looking at her, and asked for forgiveness for causing her problems. She touched the towel on the boy's head and said with a smile that the two of them were just big kids. But if they weren't more mature than other kids, they wouldn't be alive now. He added that basically his brother is amazing. The hero looks thoughtfully at his brother, whom the girl is caring for. Xiaoyu and the boy turned around as the boy got out of bed and told them not to worry. He would lead them all to a good life. A doorway, a faint light inside the hut, a basket hanging on the wall. Yuan asked if it was really him. It was so cheesy. The sun illuminates the entrance to the house. The guy bent down, moved the fabric hanging over the doorway with his hand, and held a bucket in his other hand. He raised his head with a question. They called out to him and congratulated him. A man with glasses stands in front of him, holding a box in his hands, smiling, and asked if he hadn't heard that Tong was scared to death last night and ran away with the money, and now he is the only doctor in the city. The man extended his hand to him, said that the manager behind the wall had allocated Xiao Tong house, and he could move there today. He added that he had prepared a small gift for the brothers. The guy was surprised. The man put a box in his hands and said, "They are growing, so let them eat this to support their bodies." Xiao asked what it was. He opened the box. There was a nest on a white cloth. The man explained that this was a swallow's nest, which he had kept for many years. It was an excellent tonic. The guy took it with 2 fingers, looked to the side, said that he heard Teacher Zhang say that swallows' nests are held together by liquid, and that he thought that ordinary water should not be so viscous, so most likely the swallow uses for this your saliva. The man raised an eyebrow, sweat running down his face, looking puzzled. Xiao, with a sly smile, hands the nest to the man. He put his hands forward, loudly said that he should not give it to him and not be so disgusting. He added that there is also a bloodbird's nest, and asked what her nest is made of. Then, as he thinks, the hero suggested that it was from sputum with blood, and admitted that he was just joking. Let him not pay attention. The man put his hand on the guy's shoulder, suggested without further ado that he get straight to the point, said that Xiao had not gone to buy herbs for the last few days, so that black medicine should soon run out. He asked if this was so. The guy looked at him thoughtfully. The man shuddered. Xiao said, "Didn't he buy it recently?" He pushed the hero away with his hand. The hero smiled. He said loudly that the guy knew that he bought it for the big man behind the wall. Xiao turned away. Picking his nose, the man raised his fist, asked him not to pretend to be stupid, because without him sending the medicine, the hero would not have been able to get the clinic for almost nothing. The hero has a small black cylindrical box in his hand. He offered 12 for it. The man snatched the box from his hand, putting money in another, shouted that it was sold, in a notification of gratitude from Wang. Man leaves, waves his hand at the guy. The hero thought that he was quite interesting and sincerely thanks him. The man advised him to pack his things and move. Many have already had their eyes on that brick house. The hero with his younger brother and girl approach a brick house. They stand in front of the door. On the left there is a wooden table with an inscription. They entered and looked at the wall where the red tapestry hung. The boy pointed his finger up and asked his brother to look at the banner hanging in the center. There is an inscription embroidered on the banner with golden threads. Xiao squinted and read, "Skillful hands bring it back to life." He frowned. A screen appeared with a quest chain and a question asking if he wanted to continue rescuing 10 patients. He agreed. He turned around. Behind him a man put his hand on the shoulder of a woman in a pink jacket. "They need a doctor." The guy turned to them, folded his hands, smiling broadly, and asked what injuries they had. He allowed himself to tell them that it was the right decision to come to him. The man put his hand on the woman's stomach, said that this is wonderful. His wife is 4 months pregnant. This morning her stomach suddenly hurt a little. He was afraid that something had happened, so he came for advice. The guy, smiling, hesitantly asked for advice. He was petrified when he realized she was pregnant. He closed his eyes, hand on his chin, frowned, thought this was a little difficult. The couple became nervous when the guy asked who to save, the mother or the child. The man clarified, to save. They closed their eyes, knitting their eyebrows, misunderstanding and fear on their faces. They fell upside down. Zio scratched the back of his head, apologized with a smile, said that he knew nothing about gynecology, and it would be dishonest for him to continue to deceive them. He put his hands on the shoulders of the couple standing opposite him, said that they could borrow a few books from Mr. Zhang at school, and should not take any pills. He remembered that pregnant women should not take medicine. If they still don't understand something, they can ask Teacher Zhang. They looked at each other in bewilderment. The guy waves his hand, wishing all the best. The man looked around awkwardly. The woman admitted that she felt Zio was a little better than the previous doctor, who was afraid that she would not buy his medicine when she was sick last time, and in the end she did not feel better even after taking it. They bowed, thanking him. The guy looked up in surprise. On the glowing screens both thanks were from the woman. He closed his eyes, lowered his head, did not expect that with a little hint he would earn 2 thanks just like that. He goes back into the house and decided that from today he will treat what he knows, and what he doesn't know, he doesn't know. The boy takes away a basin of water. Zio examines the hand of the man lying on the bed. He told him to be patient, called his sister. 9 out of 10 patients were saved. The girl sews up a wound on her hand. He shouts that it hurts a lot. The guy bowed to the man and the elderly woman, wished them all the best, let them come again. They stuttered and answered, okay. He thought, is it normal to say something like that to a doctor? They bowed. Zio waved his hand, told the man when he returned, let him tell his mother to drink more boiled water. He received thanks from the man and a reward of 1 strength. The task of the next stage to save 20 patients. Zio stands with his back against the dark blue background, thought that the difficulty had increased again, and asked the palace for his current strength and agility scores. A guy in a room with blue walls with gold ornaments, on the screen strength 5.5 and agility 4.1. He thought, not bad. Ewan holds a box of surgical instruments and said to his brother, why don't he treat all these patients? It's also money. The guy raised his hands, put the bottle on the top shelf, asked what he would do if he didn't know how to treat them. Complicating their illness would be even worse. He held his hand on the shelf, looked back, added that the previous doctor also did not know how to treat, but still treated patients. Palm on the cabinet, looking at his brother standing opposite. He said that they cannot follow his example. What happened to him now? No one helped him when he was in trouble, so it is important to have at least a drop of humanity. Ewan looked up, frowned, and objected that if something happened to them, then there would be no one to help them. Now many would only be glad if something happened to them. Zio put his hand on his shoulder. He bowed his head and tried to break free, but his brother held him tightly. Zio leaned towards the boy and said seriously, don't let the sadness of their age become his sadness. Ewan furrowed his eyebrows, a bead of sweat on his face, looking at him. A man looked out from behind the door. The hero turned his head, was surprised, and he turned to the doctor. A man in a blue jacket stands with his shoulders raised, timidly said that he seems to have a big problem, asked to look at it and leave everything a secret. The man began to sweat. Ewan looked displeasedly at his brother, who, barely holding back a smile, asked what was wrong with him and added that he would not treat him if his baby was no longer standing. He asked not to talk nonsense. He entered the room and closed the door behind him. He turned around, narrow eyes, a grin, said that he would demonstrate, just don't let them be scared. Menacing look of the guy, silent. The man raised his head, his cheeks puffed out. Zio covered his mouth with his hand, and the man standing opposite spat out something. There is a large glowing bubble in front of the hero. He was surprised, that's all. The bubble burst. A whirlwind of light. The guy covered his head with his hand. Ewan was scared. The flow of air knocked Ewan off her feet. Zio covered himself with his hands and resisted. The boy is sitting on the floor and calls out to his brother standing in front. The clouds of smoke dissipate. The man leaned over and put his hands forward to protect himself. Zio thought the power was not very strong, but it is definitely not something that can be done with an ordinary saliva bubble. He looked at him and said that he thought that he was not sick, but simply had some kind of supernatural powers. A drop of sweat on the man's cheek, leaned forward slightly, asked in surprise, is it the same as turning into a train out of thin air or something like that? Has unusual abilities awakened in him? Zio answered in the affirmative. He bowed low, thanked the doctor and said that he would return to his parents and tell them. The guy received thanks from him. Night, home of the hero. The brothers are lying on the bed. Zio is on his back. He puts his hands behind his head. He thinks that people with abilities are starting to appear in small trading cities. Will these times really change dramatically soon? He closed his eyes, smiled, thought, the world is becoming more and more dangerous. It's good that he has a palace. Today he has collected a lot more thanks. He hopes to unlock the weapon as soon as possible. Someone grabbed the stone fence with his hand. There was a rustling sound. The guy sat down on the bed and became wary. A group of men climbs over the fence. They jumped to the ground. A shadow fell on them and they looked up. In front of them, Zio with glowing red eyes crossed his arms over his chest and said hello. They were scared and screamed. The guy kicked the man below the belt. He fell to the ground, others stand nearby, looking at the hero. The victim raised his head and shouted, "Why did they get up? Let them attack." They raised their fists and went at the hero. Xiao looks at them with a stern look. A month in the sky, a house behind a stone fence. They fell to their knees in front of him, touching their heads to the ground, asking for mercy and to spare their lives. He raised his head, looked down, and asked who sent them here. Soldiers in camouflage with bulletproof vests and weapons. One of them knocks on the door with persistent requests to open it. Xiao turned his head, gritted his teeth, and thought about who else was brought here, that everyone couldn't sleep in the middle of the night. The guy opened the door slightly. The man said that there was a search order. The soldiers are perplexed and silent. The guy asked what it was. Xiao stands at the door with a banner around his neck, smiling, asking if he can find out why they are all gathered here so late. The soldiers laugh. They say he uses the banner for protection. He is crazy. The hero in profile, eyes closed, smiling. He thought that they would not continue the search after seeing the banner. The man pointed his finger forward and ordered a search. He pushed the hero aside. Soldiers entered the house. Xiao asked if they didn't conduct a search last time. He shouted back that the last time was the last time, and this time was this time. The hero looks at his back with irritation. Men are sitting against the wall, trying to get into the house. The soldier unties their hands. The main one shouts, "What a bunch of losers." They were sent here to look for weapons, and not only did they not find it, they were also captured. He looked back at Xiao, who turned his head to the side, humming a song. The man said with a serious face that his name was Wang Qinjiang, and if Xiao wanted to express his dissatisfaction through Boss Luo, let him say his name. The guy smiled nervously and said, "Oh well, did they do anything?" He wondered if this person might have something to do with Wang Dingyang. The soldiers leave the house. No firearms were found, the guy thought, and if this is so, will he let him go so easily? There were soldiers lined up behind Qinjiang. He looked at Xiao and said, "Until they catch the one who stole the firearms, he will continue to check," then warned him to be careful, gave the order to leave. The man put his hand on the hero's shoulder and said that if he had been born behind the wall. The guy looked around. Songyang removed his hand and, leaving, said, "Then he would become an excellent soldier, not like this heap of garbage." The car's headlights are on. The soldiers are leaving. Xiao is standing outside the house, thinking that fortunately he hid his gun on the mountain when he was collecting herbs 2 days ago. He closed his eyes and exhaled. This murder had really caused him a lot of trouble. The hero's stone house, early the next morning. The brothers were in bed, opened their eyes, woke up from exclamations. Everyone looked. The group returned. They left the house. Yuan asked if they weren't only away for a week. Why did they come back so soon? Xiao guessed a week or so. People are getting out of a military SUV. In front is a soldier with a bandaged hand. The boy said they were all clean and healthy before leaving. Now, one is dirtier than the other. Xiao thought that in such a time they would not have reached the foot of Jing Mountain. The only danger that could stand in their way was wolves. The wounded are passing by the hero. He thought that the wolves came here just at the time of their departure. What did they encounter then? He looked to the side and noticed that, judging by the extent of the damage, only his clothes. Among the soldiers, there was a girl with long dark hair and a cap and hood, her hands in the pockets of her jacket. He thought she was completely comfortable with weapons and seemed to really be much better than the rest. Yuan, standing next to the guy, looked to the side and asked if they were going to Old Man Wang. "The jeep is at the fruit stand," he replied. Most likely, after all, his recommended guide seemed to have returned back. Something must have happened to him along the way. A girl with long white hair with braids and dark glasses, a short top and a skirt and a robe, took off her hood, indignantly said what kind of guide he found for them. They drove around for 3 days and didn't even find the right direction. Van asked in fear, "And then what? Where is he now?" The guy watches their conversation from afar. She replied that she doesn't know. Something bit him in the river. When they found him, he was already cold. Xiao thought the river is outside the city. He had never heard of anything like that. The girl pursed her lips and looked at Wang, who said that he told her right away that if she wanted to get to the mountain, she had to find Xiao. And she didn't believe him then. But now the guy doesn't have time to work as her guide. He still has to work for Boss Luo. She asked if he had a relationship with Boss Luo. She frowned. There were wavy lines from her head, and asked if he was talking about that boy who was not okay with his head. The man replied that yes, it was him. The heroes are standing opposite each other. She asked, "Only he can transport people across the mountain?" Van answered, "Right." The man waves his hand at her. The girl and the soldier get into the car. She shouted, "We need to go back behind the wall." Van thought with relief, finally leaves. He turned his head and noticed Xiao. The guy goes into the house. The man puts his hand forward, runs after him, saying that this time he helped him get rid of the group, and they should thank him for that. The guy looked at him angrily. The man asked with a smile if he still held a grudge, and added that it was very kind of him to recommend Xiao in the first place. Wang spread his hands. Xiao, standing opposite, asked what about him going himself. He would draw him a map of the route, and he would take them there. Most likely, this would allow the man to get behind the wall. He objected that he did not have such skills, and then what will happen to his son if he goes there? Wang arched his eyebrow. The guy angrily said that the man has a son, and he has a brother and sister, and if he dares to recommend him to them again, he will send Yuan and Xiao to eat and drink at his expense. The man assured that he does it for his own good, and if he were 20 years younger, he would do it. Yuan stands between them, confused. The hero asked for his own good and answered that he thanks his entire family. Wang said that then he thanks all 8 generations of Xiao's ancestors. The man stands with his teeth clenched. The guy turned away, looked up with a grin, and saw that he had received thanks from man. They turned their heads when they heard the man screaming loudly, for which he was being arrested. The soldiers lead a man in a blue jacket by the arms. He asks to leave him alone. His mouth was slightly open. The hero looked to the side, asked what they wanted. Van replied that he didn't know. The guy wondered if someone else had discovered this man's ability to spit bubbles. The soldier pointed the machine gun at the civilians and ordered them to retreat. Frightened, old man Wang asked what was going on there, noting that although this child was a little mischievous, he had not made any big mistakes. The soldier pointed a gun at the merchant and ordered him to get off the road. Van fell on the main character. Xiao wondered why they captured Zhang Beijing. Frowning, he wondered if this had anything to do with superpowers. Lowering his head, the merchant declared that it was all over and the boy was finished. The main character asked why he said that. Xiao's face was surprised. Man reported that he heard that last night this guy demonstrated his superpowers, and his rat friends reported on him. He noticed that everyone behind the walls was checking people with superpowers, fearing that they might pose a threat. He looked at Xiao and asked him to ask what he would do if someone was a threat to him. Frowning, the main character replied that he would kill this man. Turning around, Van noted that everything is not as simple as he thinks, and he heard that a mental hospital for people with superpowers was organized inside. He imagined doctors standing over a man in an operating room. Wang emphasized that they use various tools to study them. He approached the main character and said that if he or Yuan had any superpowers, he should not let outsiders know about them. Looking at the merchant's back, Xiao accepted his words. The main character turned sharply at the cries that someone was being killed. The guy was chopping people with an axe, shouting that they had betrayed Beijing with their cheap tongues. Holding an axe in his hands, the man asked why he should feel sorry for them. The guy stabbed him in the back. The stranger, with the last of his strength, stabbed the axe into the guy's head. The woman watched the bloody battle. She lay down on her husband's corpse and began to cry. She asked how she could continue to live if Beijing and he were not in this world. The stunned protagonist watched as the woman cut her throat. Looking at the many corpses, Wang said that, alas, Beijing was an only child in the family, and if something happened to him, his parents would not be able to survive, and it was no one's fault that he began to boast of strength. A crowd of people started shouting that if his father really had a backbone, he could break through the wall and there was no point in killing the informer. Turning around, the merchant said that they were very tactless. Frowning, Xiao cried out that this is a very vile world. He stood against the wall next to Zhang. Looking down, the main character stated that today he would like to tell his students about how to confront people. Holding a cigarette in his hands, the teacher replied that for many years, he taught them to resist the natural environment because he did not want them to consider their own kind as imaginary enemies. Looking away, he noticed that he already knew what happened today. Frowning, Zhang said that the misfortune of others should not concern them. He suggested we talk about it. Xiao thought about it. He looked into the classroom. Taken aback, the main character wondered what they were doing. A crowd of children stood around Yuan. Xiao asked in his mind whether his superpower had been revealed. The girl stood over Yuan with a dissatisfied look and asked him to talk to Xiao so that he would not delay classes, otherwise she would complain about him to teacher Zhang. The protagonist's brother replied that if his word decided anything, he would have stopped stalling a long time ago. The children asked if Xiao was obsessed with learning and if he wanted to take control of this school. Taken aback, the main character thought that he thought they liked long classes, but they really didn't like his long classes. Rising from the table, Yuan cried out that his brother taught him everything he needed to save his life, and she was generally ungrateful. Yuan asked how dare she even say that. The girl replied that if he didn't want to talk about it, he could just forget about it. The guy looked at the enraged Yuan with interest. Looking at the guy, he asked why he was looking at him all the time. The guy replied that he could see that he was a little upset and asked him to tell him something. He said that yesterday he had a dream that his father found him a stepmother, but she treated him badly. Yuan replied with a serious look that this is normal and dreams are usually the complete opposite of reality. The guy replied that he knew this and asked Yuan not to be upset, noting that he did not think that the students did this on purpose. Placing his hand on the guy's shoulder, Brother Zio said that it was possible that his father could find him a stepfather. Taken aback, the main character began to think that they were of the same breed. Raising his fist to his mouth, he told the children that classes were starting. Standing opposite them, he asked if they knew which parts of the human body were most vulnerable. He said with interest that he would then start with what they were most familiar with, the neck. Zio noticed that there are about 20 cartilages in a person's neck, located next to the trachea, and damage to any of them can instantly incapacitate an opponent. He said that time was up and everyone could go. Children ran out of the school shouting gratitude. Sighing, the main character thought that these little brats really cannot understand his good intentions, and he hopes that they will never have to use this knowledge in their lives. Someone called out to Zio. He frowned at this, then looked into the office and ordered him to pack his things. He revealed that someone had just sent him a handwritten message saying that Boss Law had agreed to let him accompany the group. He suggested that this time the main character would have to make a foray into the Jing Mountains. Zio was taken aback by this, then walked towards him with his arm outstretched and told him to get ready, noting that the group was leaving soon. Looking away, the protagonist asked in his thoughts whether this group was able to defeat Boss Luo. He wondered if Boss Luo received enough benefits in return or if he was originally associated with this Jing Mountain. He suggested that in any case, this group seemed to have very important and hidden plans for this trip. Zio started to walk away from there. The merchant asked where he was going. He replied that he was going to see Teacher Zhang to discuss something. He reflected that it seemed like he had no choice but to go with them. The main character came up behind the school and said that he needed to go to Mount Jing. Sitting at the table, the teacher asked if he had to leave. Zio replied that it was so. Frowning, he said that Zhang had seen the end of Beijing, adding that his life and the teacher's life were in the hands of this group of people from behind the walls. The main character emphasized the fact that if he refuses now, he is afraid that in the future it will be difficult for him to live in a trading city. Looking at Zio, the teacher said that during his absence, Yuan would live at the school. The main character bowed and thanked Teacher Zhang. Looking after Zio, he asked to take care of himself. The bright sky enveloped his hut. Yuan asked if the protagonist could not go to Mount Jing. While packing his things, he asked him not to worry, noting that he would return. Yuan's face was sad. Zio handed the money to Zioyu and asked her to take it and remember to buy some cigarettes for the teacher during his stay. Closing his eyes, he thought about what if Sister Zioyu had any thoughts about money. She could just take them and leave, at least without hurting Yuan. He noted with an angry face in his mind that it was a little unpleasant to think about, but it was probably the right choice at the moment. He noticed that in the end, in this wasteland, even relatives can turn against each other for the sake of profit. Smiling, Zioyu replied that she understood what he meant, noting that she would take care of the rest and Zio could go in peace and return healthy. The main character looked at the door to the exit. A blue projection appeared in front of him with the task of refusing to go with his peers to Jing Mountain. Taken aback, he asked in his thoughts what was the matter and whether the palace wanted him to go there. He wondered if it would really be that dangerous. He left the hut. Crossing her arms, Xinyu stated that he should already know who they are, so he should get ready, after which they will leave. Zio began to pretend to be sick and said that Dad's father's name was grandfather and Dad's mother's name was grandmother. Taken aback, Xinyu asked if this man was really that sick in the head. Smirking, the soldier asked to stop pretending, noting that they had already dealt with each other. Frowning, Zio asked in his mind if it was Wang Qinjiang. He guessed that this time pretending wouldn't work, and as long as this guy was around, he was afraid that he would have to go even if he didn't want to. Crossing his arms and turning his head away, the protagonist declared that he would not go. A white stream of energy flew through the palace. A message appeared that the task was completed, and the reward was a basic skill copy scroll that learns the abilities of others. The joyful protagonist asked in his thoughts whether the task was completed. Embittered, Qinjiang asked why he decided that. Zio walked past him, saying that he was coming. Approaching Xinyu, he stated that he could go, but he had several conditions. He noted that he wanted 30,000 as a reward. Xinyu replied that this was impossible and offered 10,000. Fingering his fingers, the main character agreed and asked to add 10 bags of salt, 10 packs of cigarettes, 100 kilograms of rice, etc. After interrupting him, Xinyu agreed to 30,000. Pointing his finger at Qinjiang, Zio noticed that he had one more condition, that if he went, Qinjiang would not be able to go. He grinned and said that the main character was funny. Zio thought that this guy had searched him twice because of Wang Dingyang's matter, and if he went to the mountain with them, he might get into trouble. Xinyu looked at Yang, who nodded. Standing in front of them, Xinyu agreed. Bet Songyang is not going with them. She asked if they could go now. Smiling, he asked to wait, noting that now they were all members of the team, and he still didn't know everyone's names. Xinyu replied that they were not teammates with the refugees, and he was just a guide and should not be too overconfident. All team members looked at him and introduced themselves. The girl with a serious face said that her name was Yang Xiaojin. They asked if he was ready now. Smiling, the main character replied that he was now ready. He waved from the truck to his brother and Zioyu. Yu unfolded his palms, and Zioyu asked him not to worry with a smile, noting that he would return safe and sound. A convoy of cars moved through the wasteland. The main character thought about what teacher Jang said earlier, that the remaining traces of asphalt on the roads were left before the disaster. Looking around, he thought about what the roads were like in those days. His face was filled with interest. The main character noticed in his thoughts that, nevertheless, recently all the vegetation has noticeably blossomed and even the cabbage in teacher Jang's house has become taller than ever. Looking at the dense forest, he noted that this was not bad and that perhaps soon one potato would be enough to feed a family of 3. With his hand on his stomach, Zio said that for some reason this group doesn't say anything about snack breaks. He was suddenly surprised. Moving aside a piece of cloth, he saw boxes of cookies. The main character began to drool. The evening sky enveloped the area. The cars continued to drive through the night forest. The guy climbed out of the window and started waving his hand. He suggested setting up camp there, resting and refreshing himself. He called people with him to share food and water for everyone. They walked to the back of the truck. They were dumbfounded. They saw Zio eating cookies. Spreading his hands, the soldier asked what the main character was doing. Holding his stomach, he replied that he did nothing. Yang and Xinyu watched from the car window. The guy asked what kind of pig Zio was and how he was able to eat 5 packs of cookies. Yang watched him with a serious look. People began to carry him away, and the main character shouted for them to let him go and leave him with the cookies. Pointing his finger, the guy asked Xinyu to go back and get another guide. Xinyu looked at the guy and stated that Wang Fugri said that only he could lead them through Jing Mountain. Yang continued to watch him closely. Xinyu replied that they could do whatever they wanted with him, but this should not interfere with their journey, and when they returned from behind wall 112, they could do whatever they wanted with him. They began to take the main character away. Zio kicked a stone. Turning around, he began to eavesdrop on the soldiers' conversation. They were discussing that they say that the protagonist is the only one who can guide them to Mount Jing, but he doesn't even know how to prepare a tent. The guy noted that they would see how long Zio could last before he died there like the previous guide. Frowning, the main character asked what was wrong with him eating some cookies. The angry guys stood in front of him and shouted asking if he had eaten a little. The angry soldier said he was warning him, that he is just an ordinary tramp and should not try to break a stone with an egg. Looking at the guy, Zio asked if he knew that the egg would break if it hit a stone. The soldier asked if the egg would break. Closing his eyes, the main character replied that this was not true. The military man asked what would break in this case. As he left him, he replied that the chicken's heart would be broken. He suddenly turned around. Looking at Yang in the car, Zio wondered if she was just looking at him. Yang adjusted her cap with her hand, a slight smile on her face. The stranger began to shout that he had found traces of the beast. The soldiers near the fire were surprised by what they heard. The guy fell to the ground. Stunned, Zio noted in his thoughts that usually few animals could survive on the outskirts of the forest. He asked about what kind of animal could be there. Examining the tracks, the soldier asked if he had seen any tracks the last time he passed there. The main character pushed the soldier away. The guy asked what he was looking at. Examining the tracks, Zio wondered if the tracks of a deer spooked them. Turning around, he saw traces of the fire. Looking around, Zio noticed in his thoughts that in nature, not cleaning up food waste is a bad habit. Passing through the crowd, he asked to be allowed to look. Putting his finger to his chin, he said that these were the paw prints of a bear, which was attracted by the food scraps they left last time. The angry stranger asked who Zio was fooling and whether he thought he had never seen what a bear's claws looked like. The main character replied that it could be a wild boar. He began to move forward. The frightened soldiers asked if he was going into the forest. Turning around, he replied that they were not giving him cookies, so he would go and find something to eat himself. The guy said that he could tell that their last guide died somewhere there, so he shouldn't die like him and not waste their time. Walking into the forest, Zio replied that then he would just go and see how he died there. Moving through the forest, the main character noticed in his thoughts that from what he heard, the previous guide simply went down to the river to wash himself. As a result, something in the river bit him on the face and he died instantly. He began sharpening the stick and emphasized the fact that he had to be careful in his actions. He began to examine his spear. Putting his sword behind his back, Zio reasoned that there was usually a source of water near the habitats of large animals, and the tracks of a large deer should lead him to the river where the guide had previously been bitten. He approached the river bank. He began to scan the shore. The main character with a calm face thought that if you only look at the water, there is nothing special in it, and the guide must have been attacked by some fish hiding under the water. He noted that he fears that he, like most city residents, does not know that there are many freshwater fish that are carnivores. Turning around, he saw an anthill. He assumed he could catch a fish. He started walking towards him. Zio stabbed the pile of dirt multiple times with his knife. He picked up a piece of earth with a stick. The main character grabbed a big ant. Approaching the river, he noticed in his thoughts that the queen of white ants was an excellent bait that should be used to advantage. He threw an ant with a piece of dirt into the water. Zio prepared to strike with his spear. A huge fish began to swim around the bait. He was taken aback by this. The huge fish began to swallow the queen ant. Zio pierced the fish with a spear. He began to pull her by the rope. He wrapped it around his hand. The main character pulled the catch ashore. He was surprised by this. Standing in front of the fish, he became wary. Running into the forest, Zio thought about getting out of there, and the smell of blood brought something creepy. The soldiers smelled a pleasant smell. Frowning, the guy asked them to stop, noting that it was just a fish. The entire camp watched Zio fry the fish. He saw a window about the task that he needed to share his joy with others. Looking up, he was surprised. He looked back with a dissatisfied face. The main character approached the guys with the fish. They said they didn't mind him treating them. Leaving them, Zio asked what he was talking about, noting that he just decided to show her off and share his joy with them. The main character saw a message that the task was completed and he received a unit of agility. The stunned soldier looked at him. Turning around, he said that he could, however, share half the fish with them for 3 bottles of water. A crowd of soldiers rushed at the fish. Yang looked after him. She sat down next to the main character. Looking at him, she began to talk about fish. Zio frowned at this. She pointed the gun at the main character. A notification appeared in front of him with the characteristics of the pistol. Taken aback, he thought that if she wanted to eat, she could just tell him, adding that she had perfect skill with weapons, and because of this, he began to get nervous. He stated that he would only give 2 pieces to eat. Standing up with Zinnu, Yang noted that he should give 2 pieces each. Zinnu handed over a bar of chocolate and said that she was not going to eat his food just like that and he could eat a couple of pieces too. Zio stuffed a whole chocolate bar into his mouth. Stretching out his hand, he declared that she owed him another piece. Stunned, Zinnu asked him to wait, noting that she would bring it to him. Yang began to pepper the fish. Zio looked at her and wondered if all the girls behind the wall were as beautiful as her. Yang started stuffing the fish into her mouth. The stunned main character screamed that this was his fish and she should be restrained because she was a girl. Forest, sun over the mountains. The hero opened his eyes and woke up. Near the tent, he sat down and adjusted his hood. He looked to the side. A man is sleeping in a tent. The soldier sitting on the bench with a weapon yawned. The guy frowned and looked thoughtfully towards the forest. I approached a certain place, there was nothing on the ground. I was very surprised. In the background, the hero is standing in front of the fish bones. He crouched down and pulled out a bone from behind his back. The guy thought that last night he had thrown the remains of fish bones here, and now they had all disappeared. He looked up and thought maybe they were dragged away by ants. After all, mutant ants are the size of a finger. If there is a nest nearby, they can easily drag all these bones. The guy returns from the forest. The soldier puts the box down. The rest collect their things. The man with the beard turned around and noticed the guy. He pointed his finger to the side and told Zio that he would go in the first car and show the right road. The guy looks at him and asked him to tell everyone to stay as far away from the river as possible. Zio turned away from the man. He gritted his teeth and asked gloomily, "They are far from this river and there are only a few fish in it. Why should they be afraid?" The man at the truck waves to the hero walking forward. Everyone back to their cars, you can go. Wheels of a military vehicle. The guy looks out of the car window. The driver shouted in fear, ahead. The car convoy stopped. Zio frowned, surprised. There was a deer in front of the jeep. He wondered where this huge deer came from here. Malxian takes aim. Jun jumped out of the car. The soldiers pointed their weapons at the deer standing in front of them. Zhu shouted into the radio not to shoot, no sudden movements, no need to provoke him. Cheng lowered the gun and told the guy in the black glasses not to worry so much. He was a herbivore and not to be scared. There were no large predators here. The deer lowered its antlers. He rushed forward furiously. The driver screamed in fright and turned the steering wheel. I pressed the gas pedal. One of the cars drove off to the side. The soldiers were lying on the ground and a deer hit another car. The guy opened his mouth, looks at the deer striking the jeep. The animal threw the car up. The jeep flies to the ground, the deer runs away, and the soldiers shoot at it. They run to the man by the truck. The hero gets out of the jeep. The guy looks to the side thoughtfully. It's strange to him that Jan didn't shoot. She always looks like she's staying away. The girl looks ahead thoughtfully, her hands in her sweater pockets, behind Jun with a gun by the car. The soldiers help the guy at the overturned car. The man in the robe calls Zio. Isn't he a doctor from the trading city? Let him help. The hero goes to the victim. A man with a bruise on his forehead raised his hand to his ear and clenched his teeth. The guy looks down and thought, it's just a scratch, no big deal. He closed his eyes, put one palm on top of the other, raising one finger, and said that the pain would go away, get better faster. get better sooner. The man with the beard raised his fist and was indignant. Who even treats like that? What kind of doctor is he? Confusion on the faces of the men, the guy folded his palms and answered, a healer. The man in the robe pushed Sayo away and shouted at him to leave, he was only in the way. The guy turned his head and heard the man ask if the car could still be repaired. A guy with a black bandage on his head is following Zhu. The junior lieutenant replied that it is broken to such an extent that it can hardly be repaired, but there may still be people sitting in the back of the remaining cars. He added that this guy, Zia and Chen will sit in the back of the car, they will have to be patient a little. Zia and the guy with the headband nervously replied, okay. Smoke from a damaged jeep, people are walking towards the truck, everyone is in their car, moving on. Zia jumps into the back of the truck. The guy standing next to him complained why they didn't tell this tramp to ride around in the back of the car, all because he's a conductor. Zia screamed, clutching his throat and rolling his eyes. He fell next to the car. The soldiers ran towards them, asking what was the matter. Zhu inspects the body with a pistol and said loudly that there is nothing unusual there. He sat up and checked the guy's neck for a pulse. He froze in surprise and said that he was no longer breathing. Sayo frowned, a drop of sweat on his cheek, looking ahead. A man in a black robe runs towards the truck and asks what happened and how he died. The guy with the black bandage on his head said in fear that he didn't know. He had just climbed into the car when he screamed behind him and fell dead. He didn't see anything. Trees with a green crown. Someone paid attention to the trees, shouted, it seems that there is someone in the forest. They look around tensely. Zhu looked back. The man with the beard was begging him to come back. It was too strange. Zhu looks to the side, gritted his teeth, said sternly, no way. This time they took an order that cannot be cancelled, so either they all die or it will be completed. Xinyu approached them and shouted to stop arguing. They needed to get out of here immediately. She looked to the side and said that Sayo would lift Zia into the back and ride in it himself. The hero raised Zia's head, pulled back his hood, and there was a bee sting on his neck. The man with a beard pointed his finger into the back of the car and told the guy sitting there to get into the front car. Sayo examined the wound, wondering if bee venom could kill an adult in a few seconds. He looked back gloomily. The man asked what he was waiting for. He needed to load the body into the back. The guy replied. Now, he thought that this wilderness was becoming more and more dangerous. A black bag with a body in the back. Sayo took a bite of the cookie and asked what he couldn't do at home. He needed it all. He sits in front of the bag, eats cookies, takes a new pack out of the box, said that in the end, he lost his life. And because of his death, he was forced to sit back in the back, added that if he doesn't finish all the cookies in the car today, they won't call Zio. The men in the car looked back with displeasure. A guy with a beard asked who this guy was talking to. Another suggested that he was really sick in the head. He pulled back the collar of his sweater and asked displeasedly, it's almost winter now, so why is it getting hotter as we move north? The hero is eating cookies, turned his head, thought, the temperature rises even at such a great distance. Cars are driving towards volcanoes. He thought that there are several active volcanoes in the vicinity of Mount Jing, and they are very active. Radiator grill on a jeep. The evening of the next day, the car stopped. The soldiers got out, looking at the volcanoes in the distance. They raised their heads. A man in a robe pointed his finger up, noticed that something was written there. It is written on the stone that it is better not to enter alive. They can't understand what this means. Zhu looked back at Zio, frowned, and asked who carved it. The hero in profile, looking up, replied that he didn't know. These words weren't there when he was here last year. The man in the robe pointed his finger at Zio, shouted why he came here. He should not come to such a place. Even if he was hunting here, he was indignant about who he even was, and was clearly hiding his identity. Zio grinned evilly and replied that yes, there was something he couldn't tell them, actually. There is a dragon next to him. He winked, extended his hand forward with a thumbs-up gesture, and said that he is a descendant of dragons. The man and the singer were perplexed. There was a pause. Zhu pointed a gun at him, said that there was too much suspicion in his direction, so you need to tell it like it is. He asked if it was he who came here and cut out these words. The hero closed his eyes, raised his hands, and replied that the inscription was so high that with his height he would not be able to reach it, of course, if he could not put the stone on the ground. The man with the beard shouted angrily that he never answered what he did here in the past. Zhu scratched his head and said that last year he encountered a pack of wolves, and the wolves drove him here. The man was indignant, shouted what nonsense, how could a child survive an attack by wolves, asked, well, what made the wolves leave him alive? Zio frowned, looked to the side, and replied that at that time he was not the target of the wolves, he just happened to be there. The hero runs away, saying that he was in a hurry to hide in the forest. A pack of white wolves with glowing eyes, he didn't expect them to catch up with him. As for how he survived, the guy looked back at the wolves. They stopped chasing him as soon as he entered the Howling Wind Canyon. Zhu and the group members opened their mouths in surprise. Sunset, a whirlwind of wind among the rocks, the man asked. Even the wolves stopped chasing him when he came to this place. In this place there is something worse than a pack of wolves. The guy raised his hand, eyes closed, replied that he was hiding inside for 2 days, and when they left, he just came out, so he doesn't know what's next. He opened his eyes. One of the soldiers remarked, "They know about people with superpowers." The guy in the blue sweater spread his arms and said, "Maybe this inscription was left by one of them." A swollen vein on his temple, Zhu ordered him to remain silent. "This is a military secret." The bald guy in the blue jacket frowned, objected. Who is he pretending to be? How long can he be an officer? He thinks they will be left behind. Even if this mission is not completed, does he really think Ma Xin will let them go when they return? Xiao looks to the side, wondering how this private army can be so disorganized that the soldiers dare to contradict their officers of their own accord. Now he is even more sure that they have a different purpose for the trip. Truck with boxes. The heroes looked around and asked what the sound was. Apparently, it seemed like someone in the back of the car. Bending down, they walk along the truck with weapons. Zhu stepped to the side, pointing his gun at the black-furred creature sitting in the back. Zhu and the soldiers shoot at him. They froze in surprise. There was blood. There was a shot mouse among the boxes. He said, "Everything is fine. It's just a mouse that came to steal food." Zhu shouted Xiao's name with rage. The guy approached him and asked what it was. Standing in a stupor, Zhu asked where Zia's body was. "There is nothing in the back except boxes and a mouse." The man with the beard pointed his finger at Xiao and asked if he hadn't been sitting in the back all this time. Where was the body? The guy looked at him gloomily and replied that he did not know when the body disappeared. He thought, how could a normal adult man weighing about 90 kilograms disappear without a single sound? A man with a beard turned to the junior lieutenant and said that they should return. "It's too dangerous here." With a stern look, Zhu looks up and remains silent. They are standing by the car. He asked everyone to come here. He said that they need to discuss everything before deciding what to do next. Everyone gathered around Zhu. He said that words were left at the entrance to this gorge. It is better not to enter alive. He suggested that in the depths of the gorge there could be dangers that even a person with superpowers would find difficult to cope with. Looking ahead, serious face. On the other hand, there are also hidden dangers lurking in the forest. Zia's mysterious death, the inexplicable disappearance of his body, and all these incidents remain unanswered. Glasses on her head, Xinyu looked at him and said, "In fact, although the forest is dangerous, it doesn't seem like their entire army will die in it, but it's hard to say what dangers await them in the gorge." Zhu lowered his eyes and thought. The girl pursed her lips and looked at him silently. He was surprised when she asked if he was worried about the situation after returning behind the wall, and told him not to be afraid. She would find a way to help him transfer from the private army when they returned. He looked away, clenched his teeth, and said that this was not what he was thinking, but he agreed with her opinion. Xiao stands behind them, looked back. Zhu noticed that it was too dangerous ahead. The guy jumped on the hood of the car, looking at the animal sitting on the top of the rock. Zhu summed up, "Today they will all rest here, and tomorrow they will return behind the wall." The man in the robe sighed with relief. "This is great." Xiao frowned and opened his mouth in amazement. A white wolf with glowing eyes bared his teeth. The guy turned and shouted, "There are wolves here, quickly into the gorge." Xinyu looks up in surprise. The guy in the robe shouted, "Has he gone crazy? Wants to die?" Xiao jumped into the back of the truck. He looked back and angrily shouted at them to run into the gorge or die right now. He grabbed the dead mouse. A pack of wolves is heading towards the gorge. The wolf attacked one of the soldiers, the others ran away. The predator jumped into the back. The hero with the mouse in his hands looked back. The guy jumped down, the wolf behind him. A man in a robe points his finger forward, pushing away a guy who is trying to get into the car, shouting to let them go quickly. Xiao bent down, his hand on the wheel of the truck. The wolf pounced on the soldier by the jeep. The wolf eats its prey. The hero looked at them and ran past. The car overtook him and turns around. The jeep drove up to the hero. The car stopped next to him. Jan opened the door, extended her hand, and asked her to climb in. The girl's pistol is pointed at the driver's seat. The hero looks at her. He thought, she didn't seem to be around. Maybe she was leaving to reconnoiter the situation, and in order to save him, she actually threatens the driver with a pistol. Frowning, he wondered how a car could outrun a wolf on this terrible road in this wilderness. Yang pulled out another gun and pointed it at him. He was scared. Sweat was running down his face. The girl screamed for him to get into the car. The wheels of the cars hit the gas. They leave the pack in cars. Wolves in blood, glowing eyes. The predators turned and went into the forest. The soldiers got out of the cars, looking back in surprise. They really weren't trying to enter the gorge. They were saved. The man with the beard, embarrassed, looked to the side and said that it seemed that the tramp had not lied to them earlier. The guy was holding a rat by the tail. The man pointed his finger at him and asked what he was doing with it. Xiao took it in his hands, closed his eyes, answered to eat it, or he thinks that he just took it to wear it. The men look at the dead rodent with disgust. The hero said that the food was in the back of the truck, and he stayed there. What else will they eat? This mouse ate his cookies, and he will eat hers. That's fair. The girl stuck a knife into the mouse lying in the guy's hands. Yang raised her index finger and said that she wanted to share, and in exchange she could lend him this knife. Huge spider legs above Xiao's head. He asked with a sly smile, how about giving it to him? Blood splashes, the girl shot at a huge spider next to the hero, he dropped the mouse. The spider fell to the ground. The guy clenched his teeth and looked up. The heroes look up, many spiders are descending towards them from the mountain. A spider with glowing red eyes opened its mouth, the guy shouted what it was. He looks up and shouts to everyone to run away. A blue screen appeared in front of him with a task, he needed to help at least 10 people escape from the gorge. Zio shouted with rage that he should not interfere with his help. Dark silhouettes stood near the vehicles and shouted about what it was and that they needed to run. The insect flew over 3 cars. When the beetle was near the car with the cargo, someone started shouting for people to get into their cars. The insect flew further, it noticed a man running along a car without a body. The monster readied its chalicery while the man continued to run and call for help. The man turned around, sweat appearing on his face. An insect with glowing eyes knocked the man to the ground. Many monsters with red eyes descended into the gorge and chased the fleeing people. Someone tripped over a stone and fell. The man was trembling, sweat appeared on his face. A monster with red eyes was preparing to attack him when he stuck his hand out in front of him. Red liquid splashed to the side. Zio cut off the monster's head with a knife. The main character opened his mouth and looked away. A man lay on the ground with empty eyes and foam at the mouth. Zio grabbed his clothes. The guy threw the man on his back and ran away from the horde of monsters while he asked him to wake up because he needed him to drive the car. The main character ran to the car. When Zio threw the man into the car, he hit his head on the steering wheel. The man grabbed his head with his hands and clenched his teeth, and the guy asked him if he had woken up and said that if he had woken up, he should get behind the wheel as soon as possible. Zio turned his head to the side, sweat appearing on his face. A girl in a white cap pointed a gun in his direction. She shot at the monster who was trying to attack the main character. Smoke came from the gun as the guy looked disdainfully in Yong's direction. The girl opened the car doors and told Zio to get in. Ian and the main character climbed into the car and closed the doors. They looked into each other's eyes. A man turned in their direction, holding his head with both hands. His eyes widened as the guys in the back seats yelled at him to go and not wait. A monster with red eyes appeared in front of the man. Zio stuck a stick into him, and Yang fired a firearm. The man gritted his teeth and changed gear. The monsters were chasing the car, rushing forward. The main character looked out the window and looked back when he thought that they had finally broken away from them. The guy turned his head to Yang when she said that she had just seen him running with the driver on his shoulders and that he was strong. The man with the earring in his ear turned his head, opened his mouth wide and asked the guy if he saved him, and then thanked him and said that if it weren't for Zio, he most likely would not have survived. The main character looked up, where a system notification appeared stating that he had received the 74th gratitude coin from the driver. The car was driving along the gorge when the guy replied that he didn't have to thank him, and that he only saved him because he needed a driver. And the man replied that everything was fine, because in any case he was grateful to him, and that he regrets what happened before and promised that he will repay him for everything. A system alert appeared about another gratitude coin received from the driver, and Zio smiled widely and was surprised that he sincerely thanked him twice. The main character looked at the man and asked him to thank him again, and sweat appeared on the driver's face. Yang looked away and exclaimed that there was clearly something wrong with the guy. Zio looked back carefully. He sat down next to the girl, who crossed her arms over her chest, coughed, replied that he was just joking to diffuse the atmosphere, and suggested getting out of the gorge before these insects caught up with them, and also reminded them that they needed to meet the cars that had gone ahead. The guy looked to the side and thought that he still knew her too little, and that his identity as a person with superpowers should not be revealed, and for this it was better to keep a low profile and quietly earn gratitude. A system notification appeared above Zio that the task had been successfully completed and that a unit of power had been received. Then the guy thought that if more than 10 people were saved, then the task was considered completed. Over the narrow gorge, stars sparkled in the night sky while the main character thought that the decisions of this palace were strange. Sweat appeared on the man's face when he saw many bones among the stones and shouted about it, and the main character looked to the side and said that those insects most likely did it. Zio remembered one monster and thought that insects have human faces on their shells because they eat people, and that they seem to eat their souls. The car passed the skull, kicking up dust. The car drove out of a narrow gorge. A crescent moon was shining over the mountains when the car approached 2 more cars. The main character was looking at the standing people when someone said that there were only 11 people left. Sweat appeared on the man's face as he said that they had lost a lot. The man opened his mouth wide and began to shout that he said that they needed to turn back, but they still went into the gorge, and that it was not for nothing that it was written on that stone that it was better not to enter alive. The man wondered why they didn't listen right away. People stood opposite each other and did not understand what was the point of talking about this now, and that if someone wanted to return, then let them leave, because the wolves were probably already waiting for them. Someone said that they had no choice but to go into the gorge and that they were lucky to survive. The man covered his face with his gloved hand, clenched his teeth and muttered that they were taking a break, and that it was useless to argue because now the most important thing was to work together and get out alive. The girl with glasses on her head opened her mouth and asked him what kind of mission he came to these mountains with. The main character stood and looked decisively forward. Zhu opened his eyes and sweat appeared on his face. The man clenched his fist in front of him, looked at the lieutenant and asked him what the purpose of his visit to the mountain was. Behind the lieutenant stood Xiao as he asked the man who asked the question who they were so that he could tell them his purpose and reminded them not to forget that they were just strangers in the company. The main character sat on the hood of the car and thought that he had heard that the group was just trying to get to the other wall and decided to go along with these privateers, and that it was not unusual that ordinary soldiers did not want to talk about it. The man in the cap looked to the side and asked how to be one. People turned towards the lieutenant and began to tell him to tell them what their mission was, because so many of their brothers had already died along this path. Xiao looked at Xenia and decided that she was also not simple, since one word of hers provoked a conflict between ordinary soldiers. A girl in a black jacket approached the guy. Yang stood in front of Xiao and said that she was hungry, and the main character gritted his teeth and asked her why she was telling him this, because she was not his girlfriend. She extended her hand to the guy and asked that in this case he would return her knife to her. Yang pointed a gun at the guy, and he sat her on a stone and said with a smile that he would bring her something to eat, and then asked if there was something she didn't eat, to which the girl answered in the negative. She remembered opening the car doors, said that she had thrown the previous mouse into the trunk, and told Xiao to use it for cooking. Sweat appeared on the protagonist's face, and he, smiling, thought that the mouse that he threw away to escape the swarm was actually picked up by Yang. That is, she stole food from the swarm of insects, and out loud he agreed with the girl's proposal. Over the fire, a hand held a stick with an animal leg. Cheng opened his mouth wide and told the man opposite that now they were all in the same boat, and that if he did not tell them, then perhaps they would all die because of this, to which Zhu replied that he had told them everything that knows. The man's nose smelled some kind of aroma. People stood in a semicircle near a piece of meat that was being cooked over a fire. Xiao stood holding a rat in his hand, from which a piece had been cut off, and thought that everything else was useless. The main character swung his hand and threw the remains into the sky when a man shouted at him asking why he threw it away. Xiao turned to him and asked if he was going to eat it, and then said that if he wanted, he should go and get it, to which the man bared his sharp teeth and shouted that he was not going to eat something so disgusting. Xiao was shown in profile as he added that it was because he had not eaten anything even more disgusting, and that he had heard it said before that many rich people behind the wall like to eat birds' nests, and also that he did not know where does the swallow have so much saliva. Perhaps it has tuberculosis. Sweat appeared on the man's face because he did not understand anything. Xiao added that it is not surprising that there is an idiom about a sick swallow circling in circles, which describes swallows that spit. The men covered their mouths and opened their eyes wide as they listened intently to Xiao. There were many sticks lying in the burning fire. The main character looked at Yang and thought that he still had a basic skill copy scroll that he did not use when he completed the quest to refuse a trip to the mountains. He closed his eyes and decided that the girl must have other excellent skills besides firearms. The guy found himself in the palace and asked him to give him a list of all Yang's skills, when a system notification popped up saying that there was no display permission. Xiao looked up, opened his mouth slightly, and said that he had studied her skill before and that he should have permission to view others. Once again, the notification that there was no display permission appeared, and the guy thought that this palace had become more legible, and that he could not believe that there was no loophole left. The main character, standing with his back, put his hand on his belt and asked about the level of her combat skills, to which he was told that it was advanced. When Xiao asked about his fighting skills and whether they were stronger, a system notification popped up stating that he was at a medium or normal level. This realization knocked the guy face down to the ground. He grabbed his head with his hand, clenched his teeth and cursed that he was not as good as Yang. Xiao turned his head to the side, looked at the girl and decided that it was because his fighting skills were a reflection of his accumulated life experience gained from fighting people, rather than the result of professional training, and that based on his intuition, she should have powerful fighting skills. The protagonist clenched his fist as he thought about the fact that she couldn't defeat him in a real fight, and that advanced fighting skills were useful anyway, so it was worth learning them first. The guy pursed his lips and looked to the side as he decided to use the skill copy scroll. A system notification appeared congratulating the target for randomly selecting the advanced skill of jumping rope and asking if he would like to learn the skill. Xiao raised his hands to the notification window, showed his sharp teeth and shouted about why this particular skill was chosen, and why this skill was even considered an advanced skill, and how it worked. For example, would he be able to do a backflip while he was jump rope? Yang opened her mouth slightly and looked to the side when she asked when the meat would be ready, and then added that if the meat was overcooked, it would not taste good. The main character handed the girl the meat on a stick, laughed and said that it was already ready, and that in the wasteland food needs to be fried longer and water needs to be boiled for more than 10 minutes before drinking. The men's stomachs began to growl. Zhu spread his arms out to his sides and opened his palms, asking the people around him if anyone on their team had any food left, to which he was answered in the negative. The guy took a bite of the piece of meat he was holding in his hand and thought that now they were all silent, and none of them admitted that they were hiding food, and then added that he did not understand how you could share something that saves a person's life with just anyone, and decided that there was nothing wrong with it. Lieutenant Zhu, with Chang and Jun standing behind him, pointed his finger at the main character and said that no one knew more about survival in the wild than him, so he could help everyone find food and cook it. Xiao looked ahead seriously as a system alert popped up telling him that he had a new task, which was to help his team find food. The guy stood up with a piece of meat in his hand. He pointed his finger at the man in the cap and said that he saw him steal food from the truck before entering the gorge, and that it should be in his bag. At that moment a system notification appeared saying that the task was completed and that the reward is a basic skill copy scroll. Xiao smiled and looked away as he thought about how it was said to find food anyway, but there was no mention of where to look, so everything was fair, and then he added that he liked the way the palace graded tasks more and more. Zhu extended his hand in front of him with his palm open and ordered the man in the cap to take out the food. Cheng opened his eyes and mouth wide and screamed, asking what they were doing when he went for food, and then he himself answered that they went for clothes, a tent, and the star went for his cosmetic bag, after which the man asked again about that. Why should he share food with them now? Zhu frowned and exclaimed that he was doing this for the benefit of the entire team. Cheng pulled out a weapon and pointed it in front of him as he asked the lieutenant if he still thought he had any power now. Zhu opened his eyes wide and became angry when the barrel of a gun was pointed in his direction, and Cheng suggested that he try to touch him. There were other people standing near the two when the guy in the cap shouted that he should not try to take the food from him. Zhu looked at the gun, gritted his teeth and asked him to share with them now, and as soon as it becomes light, they can find food for everyone. Cheng, with a bandage on his face, opened his mouth and said that it was still unknown whether they would get out of here alive or not. A man in uniform rushed past a man in a cap. Zhu kicked the attacker in the stomach. The man with a pistol in his hand flew away from the lieutenant. Cheng fell to the ground and pointed the gun forward. Zhu stood not far from the man lying on the ground with a firearm and looked at him. The shadow of his cap fell on his eyes and sweat appeared on his face. A man in a bandana appeared behind the lieutenant and clenched his fist. He had a knife in his other hand when the guy attacked the man, who had his back to him. Zhu looked back with wide eyes. Xiao and Yang looked carefully in the same direction. A dark silhouette, similar to a lieutenant, grabbed the hand in which the guy was holding a knife. The main character opened his mouth and was surprised, thinking that this was a superpower. A dark silhouette stuck a knife in the stomach of a guy in a bandana. Cheng put his weapon in front of him and fired. A black shadow with white eyes appeared in front of the lieutenant. Bullets were flying into the dark silhouette. They stopped in front of him and fell. The bullets landed on the ground and bounced off. Xinyu, Jun and the other people gaped in surprise while Xiao thought about the fact that he suspected that there were people with superpowers in the group, but before that he only thought about Yang. The main character opened his eyes and mouth wide when he thought that no one would have thought that Zhu would hide it so well, and that it was a pity that there was no skill copy scroll yet, because he had to copy his skill when there will be an opportunity for him. Xiao closed his mouth and looked to the side. A girl in a hood with ears was sitting next to him. The guy asked her if she was interested, and Yang continued eating meat and replied that she was interested. The main character looked away and thought that she absolutely didn't care about what was happening. Zhu stood between two black shadows. The silhouettes disappeared, and a guy in a bandana was sitting on the ground next to the lieutenant. Zhu parted his mouth and looked away as he said that he was just trying to find a way out of their situation and that he didn't want to offend anyone. The lieutenant looked towards the fire where Xiao and Yang were sitting and said that Wang had previously told him that the main character was a doctor, so he asked him to examine the wound. Xiao looked to the side and sighed. A guy was sitting on the ground in front of him and was pulling out a knife when the main character said that his injury was quite serious. The guy in the bandana closed one eye and asked how long he had left to live, to which he was answered 10, and he asked again whether it was in minutes. Xiao sat down next to him and continued the countdown. The guy in the bandana felt bad. Zhu looked forward seriously and said that he had avoided vital places and internal organs, so there was no need to scare the person, and then added that he had heard that Xiao had medicine for wounds, and also that he would not believe that he took them with him when he went into the wasteland. The main character looked away while the guy lay crying next to him and replied that he was hired as their guide, not their personal doctor, and then asked about who would pay for his medicine, since it was very expensive. Lieutenant Zhu covered his face with his hand and said that he lost money on the way. The wounded guy gritted his teeth and replied that he had money with him. The main character sat down next to him and asked him where his money was, in his right or left pocket, and the guy pointed to his pants and said that they were there. The people behind Zio began to shout that he was a charlatan, because a cut cannot be treated without stitches. When he looked down and warned that he immediately wanted to say that he did not know how to stitch wounds, so it was only up to God whether the wound would heal after the medicine or not. While the main character was licking his lips and counting the money, Zinyu approached him and said that she had a sewing kit, but she felt bad at the sight of blood, and on the other hand, Zhu approached the guy and replied that he would sew it up. There was a voice that exclaimed that he should stop counting the money, because first of all he needed to save the man. The guy in the bandana thanked the main character when he said that he would not take too much money from him, and that 12 should be enough. A system notification popped up that he had received a thank you from a guy named Lei, as Zio thought that he was one step closer to unlocking the weapon. Gloved hands stitched the wound using a needle and thread. Lieutenant Zhu frowned. He said that now he was not going to hide this from them, and said that in fact, in this mountainous region there were remnants of a civilization that existed before the disaster. While he was stitching up the wound of the guy who was being held by the hands, the man added that they were sent by the higher authorities to map out a route to the ruins in these mountains so that the main group could come and explore later. Then the lieutenant discovered that this mountainous region contained mysterious powers that could develop animals and, possibly, help them, superhumans, so he decided to move on. Lei clenched the rag between his teeth, sweat running down his face as Zhu concluded that he had changed his mind about going back behind the wall because he realized it was too dangerous. The lieutenant opened his mouth and said that he did not know what was waiting for him there, so he did not want to take risks. He stood next to the guy in the bandana, looked at him and said that after his superpowers were revealed, there was no way for him to go back beyond the wall, and then added that he was going to go deeper into this mountainous region to continue his research. Zhu turned his head and looked behind him as he concluded that they now knew the dangers of this place, so they themselves had to decide whether they wanted to leave or stay. Zio and Yang stood next to each other and looked in the same direction. Zinyu stood next to the man who gritted his teeth. The girl in the hood with red ears told the lieutenant that she would go with him because it was too dangerous here, and Zio was surprised at how many words she said at once. The guy with the glasses exchanged glances with the other man as the voice said that the best way to get out alive was to follow the Superman. The men in gray t-shirts raised their hands and said they would go too. Zinyu looked at the main character and asked him if he was coming, and then said that he would go if he joined. Zio raised his hand, pushed the girl away and replied that he was going with the lieutenant. Zhu looked to the side, opened his mouth and said that in that case they should follow him, and that they would leave at dawn. The lieutenant turned to the people behind him and said that they had all agreed in advance that the entire team would obey him, and that if anyone disobeyed him, they should not expect politeness from him, and then added that there was a dense forest ahead and that they would have to abandon the car and walk. Zhu turned and addressed the man in dark glasses named Malxian. He told him that he would go first and carry the wounded guy with him. The protagonist's ear grew larger when he listened to the fact that someone persistently began to thank the lieutenant. Zio pushed the man with glasses and stopped in front of the guy wearing a bandana lying on the ground. He opened his mouth wide, clenched his fist in front of him and exclaimed that he would carry the wounded man, and that he would kill anyone who tried to steal him today. Zhu and Lei opened their mouths and stared ahead with empty eyes, and the wounded guy asked if Zio had taken the right medicine and why he suddenly became so kind. The midday sun illuminated the forest and mountains. Two people were dragging a guy on a stretcher when the main character asked him if he still needed medicine, and Lei said that he didn't need it and thanked him. A system notification appeared indicating that he had received a coin for thank you. The lieutenant looked carefully at the smiling guy in front and thought that he was clearly one of those people who didn't care about anyone, but why was he suddenly so worried about others? Sweat appeared on the face of the guy in the bandana when he was asked if he was hungry and thirsty, and Lei replied that he was not hungry yet and thanked the guy when an alert appeared that Zio received another coin for thanking him. Zhu thought about what he was really after. The main character smiled widely and looked at the wounded guy while he thought that Lei was very useful in collecting gratitude coins. A crowd of people moved through the dense forest. Zio looked to the side and opened his mouth slightly when he thought that the last time he was here was a year ago, and that since then the trees had become much taller and more luxuriant. He decided that this was strange. The guy's profile didn't change when he heard someone asking why he kept touching her. In front of Zinyu stood a guy who smiled while he talked about what was wrong with touching her, especially since he wanted even more. This guy narrowed his eyes, laughed disgustingly and asked what she thought about tonight. The girl in the top and short skirt opened her mouth and told the guy not to come near her. Steam came out of his nose. They put a gun to the back of the guy's head. He raised his hands while Yang stood behind him and Zio watched it all. The girl turned to the main character and told him that this guy's gun was his. Zio pointed his finger at himself and asked if she meant him, and Yang confirmed. The main character threw the stretcher with the wounded guy and walked towards the girl when he said that there was no need to ask him twice. His hand removed the firearm from its holster as he exclaimed that he had found it. The guy opened his mouth wide, looked towards Young and asked her if she knew how severe the charge was for depriving private troops of their weapons, to which the girl replied that if he threatened her again, he would die. Yang looked away when asked about what if she gave the gun to this tramp if he couldn't use it anyway. Zio held a firearm in his hand and looked at it carefully. The guy who harassed Zinyu ran into the forest when Yang told him to get out. The girl carefully looked to the side and thought that the main character was quite skilled with weapons. Lieutenant Zhu looked away and remained silent. He approached Zio and asked him if he could find food for everyone. The guy closed his eyes, raised his hand and replied that he was not God or their father, so he could not say that he would find food for all of them, and then asked if Zhu thought that if he now wanted a wild boar to crash into a tree, then it will take it and crash. At that moment, someone crashed into the tree trunk. Zio, Zhu and Cheng opened their mouths and stared in one direction when the main character thought that this could not be true. A large boar was lying near a trunk under the treetops when people began to come up to it and say that it was really a wild boar, and that Zio was just a magician, and also that he had a magic mouth because everything he said would appear. Zio turned away from them and thought that the stupid child Yuan made another wish. The main character remembered the little boy who folded his palms in front of him and closed his eyes. He was wondering how he was doing at Jing Mountain, and then he wished him so that he doesn't go hungry. The man's hand held a knife, cutting the animal. The hero began to look askance at Zio, who was talking about not leaving food for tomorrow that he couldn't finish today and trying not to mess around with blood for a long time, since it attracts animals very well. The blood from the beast slowly flowed onto the ground in which the ants were located. The main character began to answer that currently ants the size of a thumb do not attack during the day while a person is active. But at night, if the ants can smell a bloody smell near a person, he will be eaten like regular food and just one bite of the formic acid release can cause severe pain. The guy looked at Zio, saying that he understood everything, calling the main character good. The girl with heavenly hair watched the guys, saying that Zio was quite sincere. Out of the corner of her eye, the girl began to notice something. The beast was roasted on a fire, and many people were sitting around it. Zio sat with the meat in his hands and, closing his eyes, began to eat it, and a girl began to sit down next to the guy, looking at him carefully. She began to look at Zio, who was not at all happy with her, with a smile on her face, and said that it seemed to her that she could have a very good time in the wasteland. Since it looked romantic, the main character began to tell the girl that this was survival and there is nothing romantic about it. The girl began to make eyes at the main character, saying that he was very handsome and charming. The guy did not understand what the girl wanted from him. Zio began to look carefully at the girl, thinking that she could not get anything from Zhu Xianchu, so she came to him. Zhu waved away the girl who was running after him. Before, Zio had often seen the girl go to Zhu Xianchu to talk to him, but every time she was met with rebuff since Zhu was an adult with a strong character who knows what he wants. Zio looked at the girl out of the corner of his eye, realizing that for her he was just a brainless teenager. So perhaps she decided that the main character would go through fire and water for her if he showed sympathy. Zio understood that in the end he had a weapon and he could well protect the girl. The main character began to look at his frightened sister with anger and tell her not to come closer. The girl began to look at Zio with a playful smile and say that perhaps they had some kind of misunderstanding earlier, but in reality she is not like that. The girl began to stroke the main character's cheek, who was very surprised by this act. The sister began to tell the guy that she liked him. The guy began to shout angrily at the girl and tell her to shut up. Next to Zio and the girl there was another person who looked at them in surprise. The main character began to look in surprise at the man sitting next to him, and the girl was equally surprised. Zinyu began to leave Zio, saying that he was completely sick and the guy deserved to be alone. Since Zio learned to hunt, he has seen too many women like this, just looking for someone to rely on in this broken world, or someone to use as a tool. The main character looked at Zinyu with disbelief, eating chicken and telling himself that he didn't need such a woman for nothing to waste food on her. One of the guys began to grit his teeth. The hero began to look at Zhu, saying that they had run out of bottled water and food. Since they initially took too little water, the guy began to ask her where they could get more water. Zhu began to approach the sitting Zio, asking him where he could get more water. The system window began to show the hero to tell his teammates how to find water. Zio began to look to the side, lost in thought. The main character stood in the middle of the crowd, confidently telling all the people that to find water in the wild, you can rely on rivers or collect resources from leaves. The main character began to look away, telling people that they were lucky because there were several pine trees nearby that had pine juice that could quench their thirst. The system window began to tell the guy that he had completed the task and received part of the power. Zio clenched his fist, looking at him angrily. The main character's foot began to move on the ground. Zio climbed the tree from different sides with quick and deft movements. The guy's hand began to reach for one leaf that was on the tree. People looked at Zio in surprise, not understanding what he was doing. The guy began to look down on the crowd, holding the grass and telling them all that if they did not want to die, they should do as he did. Zio began to close his eyes and open his mouth to squeeze the grass from which the juice came. People asked the guy if it's really drinkable. Zio looked at everyone, wiping his mouth and talking about drinking this, whether they like it or not. The main character began to look away with dissatisfaction. Yang and Zhu began to approach Zio and began to look at the grass. Yang began to bring the pine needles to her mouth. Zio began to look at the girl with a smile on his face, happy that she was doing this. The main character began to look in surprise at the system window, which showed that the target's advanced skill was randomly selected, which was bomb making. Zio was offered to study all this. The guy began to look at Yang, who was taking the pine needles. The main character could not understand what kind of training the girl had gone through and why her skills were so severe. Zio was wondering if the target had the skills of covert killing. The system window began to show the guy that she had analyzed the target and an advanced stealth killing skill had been found. Zio began to look at the girl with a smile, thinking about whether she had the skill of singing children's songs. The system window immediately began to show the advanced skill and say that it had been found. The main character looked at the girl with incomprehension, not understanding what kind of disorder was in her skills. Zio quickly jumped from the tree to the ground. Two guys stood near a tree, telling each other that now they need to climb the tree. Although people have not been monkeys for a long time, the guy replied that it would be great to become a giraffe in the next life. Zio began to look at the guys, telling them that animals also do not live as they seem, and the main character heard that giraffes, although tall enough to protect themselves from external enemies, but they have difficulties in mating, so before courtship male giraffes must drink urine to determine if a female giraffe is on point. The guys were disgusted and couldn't figure out what these little known facts were that Zio had learned to disgust others. The mountains began to thicken, forming clouds. Zio began to look at this with confidence, shouting that acid rain was coming towards them. People began to quickly run away from the downpour, looking for somewhere to hide from it. The main character put on a hood, hiding from the rain and looking down. Some people began to carry the guy on the couch, who was unconscious. Cave. People began to stand in the cave, looking at the rain and rejoicing that they had it nearby. Hands began to set the torch on fire using a lighter. The guy was holding a torch in his hands, next to which there were people. The hero began to point in surprise and fear at the wall, telling him to look at it. There was someone's inscription on the wall, which said that they saw strange dark figures in the forest that disappeared. No one could understand what it meant. Huge red lightning began to appear near the cave, shooting in different directions. People looked at the wall in the cave, asking each other about who carved it. If they lost anyone along the way, everyone began to say that they lost Zuzu's body and nothing more. Sir Zhu began to look forward confidently, telling everyone that he had not heard that anyone from their 113th wall had crossed the mountain before, and perhaps someone from the 112th had taken refuge here and left a message. However, everyone understood that if they had a satellite phone with them at that time, they would have transmitted the signal. Zio began to look askance at Yang, telling the guys that he had heard Teacher Jiang say that there were telephones behind the walls, but no one knew what satellite telephones were. Yang began to look at the main character, calmly saying that people had captured several satellites created before the disaster, and these satellites make it possible to maintain communication between different walls. One of the guys began to open his mouth wide, waving his arms, saying that this time the senior management did not provide them with satellite phones and they must be trying to explore the area with the help of human lives. And if everyone died, it would mean that in the depths of the mountains there is a danger. Zhu began to tell the guy not to speculate without the slightest information. Sir began to look at all the people, saying that it was already late and someone should take turns on duty today, and he would be on the first shift, and the rest, not counting the girls, would take turns. Zio looked carefully at the guy, believing that this was the decision really protects from dangers outside, but also for the main character. Internal security was no less important, and in the end he only took a gun today. Yang began to look at the surprised Zio, saying that the first half of the night would be his and the second her. The main character looks at the girl, noticing that he and Yang have no need to quarrel and they still trust each other, and the girl is not weaker than the guy, and if we think that the current situation is dangerous, they can protect each other. Zio smiled, telling Yang that he agreed with her. The girl began to move away from the guy, saying that she had gone. The guy began to ask Yang if he should go with her, but the girl refused. The guy looked at Yang confidently, not understanding why she was so brave and what supported her confidence. Xinyu began to look at the guy with a smile, telling him that he would go with her, since Zio really doesn't understand girls. The main character began to look in surprise, not understanding what was wrong. Crowds of people stood in the cave, still watching the rain. The two men began to smile and grin, saying to each other that it would be a pity if these two girls went missing. The rain didn't stop pouring. Zinyu began to approach the guys who asked him if there was anything unusual. The girl said that everything was fine and there was nothing there. The three guys began to look at Zinyu and say that this was good and they would also go out to relieve themselves. Zhu began to look at the guys, telling them to go and come back quickly. Without stopping for a smoke break, the heroes said that they would do everything. Xiao sat on the top of the cave, looking at all the people. The main character began to look at something. Zinyu looked at Yang with a smile. Xiao understood that Zinyu was behaving like a star who was trying to go to the next wall to expand her fame. The guy could not understand why Yang took such a risk. Xiao heard that the girl had previously given Zinyu some money because she wanted to follow the team to wall 112 to find relatives. The guy couldn't believe it was so simple. The main character looked at the girls with disbelief. He understood that Zinyu and Yang demonstrated a particularly close relationship throughout the journey, and the previous joint eating of fish and helping Yang and Zin created the impression that their relationship was much more than just a worker and an employer. Xiao looked at the two heroines, wondering what they were talking about. Zinyu looked at Yang with a smile, telling the girl that they could leave Jing Mountain together in a couple of days. Xiao began to understand that the girl understood that he had an alliance with Yang, and after the girl could not come to an agreement with the guy, Xi went to recruit Yang. Zinyu's hand began to offer Yang a wad of money, saying that it was gratitude for the fact that the girl had helped her earlier. Yang began to take the money, and Zinyu asked her if she would continue to help. Yang began to tell the girl that she did not want to help leave the mountain, but she could make sure that Zinyu died with dignity. Xiao began to look slyly at the girls, realizing that these manipulations were causing deja vu in the guy. A fire began to be lit in the cave. The guys looked at the exit, not understanding why they left and never returned. Yang began to look at the time, saying that almost 10 minutes had passed. One of the guys started opening his mouth wide and screaming that there was something wet in the place. The guys ran away from the exit, afraid to find something there. Xiao began to look at the people in surprise, standing next to the exit from the cave. Rain began to drip on the ceiling of the cave. The guys looked with fear at the drops that fell on the floor and realized that this was a false alarm. Xiao began to point his finger at the drops, saying that they could get water directly from here, since the rock formations filter the water even purer than water from a well, and it is probably one of the cleanest sources of water in the wasteland. Zhu began to point his finger at the water and, looking at the people, asked if everyone had heard Xiao. Sir began to tell people to collect some water, since although the pine needles were able to provide some moisture, there was too little of it. The meat was surprised that he did not receive thanks. Hands began to hold the flask, pouring water into it. Zhu began to look at the guys who were pouring water and told them that if he finished, he could take over half the night. The guys began to tell Sir to do just that, but first they had to smoke a couple of cigarettes. Everyone was asleep except Zhu, who was watching everyone. Two guys were sitting on the rocks with their backs to Zhu. The heroes held a cigarette in their mouths and glanced slyly at Sir. The guy's feet began to remove the cigarette. One of the guys began to stand near Xiao and the second near Yang, waving a knife and trying to kill them. The guy's face was confident and crazy. The guy screamed for them all to go to hell. A man wearing gloves with both hands swings a knife at someone. The girl Yang shoots the man in silence. The main character grabs with one hand both hands of a man holding a knife. He instantly turns him onto his back. The junior lieutenant and his comrade pay attention to the noise, asking what is happening and what is the matter. They see Yang and Xiao attacking unknown men. A man in a black cloak and bandage, holding his wound, clenches his teeth in pain. He, closing one eye, begins to shout to his colleague, saying his name Sun Jinjeng, so that he acts. A man among the squad raises his hands, opening his eyes, and says that he has nothing to do with it. Standing in front of the camp, he raises his hands in fear. The girl and the main character look suspiciously at the military man. Zinyu, also continuing to look suspiciously, asks himself what is happening again, and can't these people just calm down for a while? Holding the man's throat with two fingers, Xiao asks himself what they are trying to achieve with this desperate, sneaky attack. Water, weapons, or was it all because of Luo Zinyu? Looking down with dissatisfaction, he thinks that this doesn't matter anymore. The notice says about the task that you need to give the enemy a painful death. Grabbing him by the throat, at the moment the man begins to cough up blood, he thinks that in this wilderness one must always get rid of all potential dangers. This is the law of survival. Sun, covered in sweat, looks at the characters with fear. He looks at the squad, shouting at them that for the record, he had nothing to do with it, and he was part of their plan for a dastardly attack. Ian, looking from under his cap at the man, asks the guy what it means that this is what is happening, and so he was in collusion with them and knew about the vile attack. She, standing next to everyone from the squad, sharply shoots at Sun Junjin. Looking after him, she says that covering up a crime is tantamount to the crime itself. The main character looks towards the girl with a blank face, thinking that it is better not to mess with this girl again. The notification states that the task has been completed and the reward is a master level skill copy scroll. Xiao, with an excited look, looks at the fallen scroll in the cave, asking himself again about the master level skill copy scroll. The main character looks at the sinister lieutenant. The notice again states that the Shadow's supernatural ability has been learned, asking the guy if he wants to learn it. Xiao thinks that he cannot believe it, and this is exactly what he needed, responding to the notification that he wants to study. The main character stands against the background of a purple magical wall. The notification states that the target has been studied. Being in a dark room, releasing burgundy magic from her hands, similar to blood, she asks herself that this haze is a shadow. The hero turns his gaze back. He sees a dark bloody ghost with red eyes in front of him, thinking that this black shadow looks darker and more massive than Zhu Xianchu's, and this is because his appearance is darker and more massive. Seriously looking straight into his eyes, Xiao thinks that he wonders how well this shadow fights. He closes his eyes. The ghost opens from his seat, leaving his remnants of magic on the floor. He begins to circle around the main character. Suddenly, the ghost changes its direction with all speed towards Xiao, who has closed his eyes. He immediately grabs it with his hand, shattering its magic piece by piece. Holding his fist up, smashing the magic, he notes in his head that this is not bad, and this shadow is at least twice as strong and faster than his own body. He looks forward with interest, continuing to think that the density is also very high, so it is not surprising that Zhu Xianchu was able to use his shadow to deflect the shots. Poking his finger at the notification system, he thinks that according to the palace's prompts, the shadow cannot die and the use time is based on spiritual power. Seriously looking at the system and pointing his finger at it, his thoughts suggest that he can continue to use it as long as his spiritual energy is strong. But how can one calculate something as vague as spiritual power? Looking at the notice, he asks the palace what his spiritual power is. The notice states that the guy does not have access to information. He looks at him with an emotionless face, remaining silent. Against the backdrop of a dark room, he says in his head that he will not cooperate with this palace. Looking at his hand, from which burgundy energy is coming out, he asks himself that this is really strange, and why strength and agility are displayed in numbers, but spiritual strength is not, telling himself that he would rather not think about it now, while there is time, and it would be better for him to gain strength, because by training his body, he can improve his strength and agility. Clenching the magic in his fist, making a small smile, Xiao confidently looks forward, telling himself that now with his shadow abilities, he is a real person with superpowers. The lieutenant, looking at the corpses of the men and the guy and girl standing next to them, says that they themselves are to blame for sneaking up on them and being killed in response. Xianchu, tensely, tells them that Sun Jinjiang was not involved, so he did not deserve to die. Turning away from them, he says with anger against their background that, however, it is too late to talk about anything, adding that in this wilderness there is no right and wrong at all. Yang and Xiao look at the lieutenant with hostility, remaining silent. The girl turns to the hero, asking him that he just pretended to be asleep. The main character, looking thoughtfully at the girl, thinks about it. That life in the trading city has given him the habit of being constantly alert, even when he is sleeping, and not losing his vigilance. And this young Xiaojin was clearly pretending to be asleep herself, but decided to ask him, and he does not understand her. Walking away from Yang, Xiao asks if she figured it out, to which the girl says that she is bored. Two burning volcanoes smoke in the blue sky. The main character looks at the bodies lying in a line in the middle of the cave. He looks emotionlessly at the bloody body on the ground, thinking that he cannot understand how Zuxia's body disappeared earlier. Pursing his lips, he continues to look down, telling himself that these three bodies are lying here and nothing happened, and this is at least strange. The lieutenant and the hero stand at the exit from the cave, looking into the cave, informing them that it is already dawn, and let them prepare to hit the road, although they do not know what dangers lie ahead for them, but they cannot remain in place. Looking ahead, the lieutenant explains that they must find their next campsite before dark. His gaze suddenly shifts to the side, and Xianchu reveals that the two guys who went outside to relieve themselves last night haven't returned, so they're probably going to have something going on. Looking at the military, Xian, Yang, and the protagonist, he says that he hopes that next time they will not go alone, and after all, they have seen what happens to such people. The man in the bandana, looking uncertainly to the side, apologizes to everyone, asking if someone could kindly help him up. Xiao appears in front of the man, to whom he reacted by opening his eyes. He grabs him by the bandages on his stomach. The man begins to scream at the top of his lungs that he is being killed. Hitting him with his hand, the hero asks why he is shouting and let him get up and walk, because the wounds have already healed. Lifting his jacket and exposing his stomach, he touches it, asking again that they have indeed already healed. The man sits, turning to Xiao, who has turned to him that this black medicine of his works very well, thanking the guy, to which he replies that this is an inheritance from his ancestors. The notice reads thanks from Wang Lei. The lieutenant sternly addresses the nodding protagonist, asking if he still has the medicine. Zio passes by the military man, saying that he is no more, to which the man says that he will pay for it from his own pocket and offers double the price. The guy turns around with a crazy face, asking what he just said, changing his mind, and now saying that then there is still a little medicine left. The main character looks suspiciously at the lieutenant, holding his hand on his chin, asking him what he didn't say earlier, that he had no money, to which the man replies that the 3 they killed had it, so he borrowed from them. In a funny way, clutching his heart, the main character thinks that he seems to be too inexperienced and did not search the corpses. How could he make such a stupid mistake, and his heart bleeds? Zio, spreading his hands to the sides in front of the lieutenant, tells him that this is not his money, but the main character's money, and let him give him at least half, to which the man says that he is not interested in money, and he will give him all 8,000 or about what he has on him if he gives him the medicine. The characters' hands pass medicine and money to each other. Zio begins to stare at the man while holding the money in his hands. The lieutenant, irritated, puts his hands on his hips, telling the main character not to look, and he really isn't lying, because that's all that happened. The history notice states that it has been discovered that there are 20,000 on the media, and he can purchase them on the initial personal storage. Zio thinks about how he needs to buy it, repeating it several times. Dark magic is creeping towards the door. The notice states that this is a successful initial personal storage purchase. The main character gradually approaches the dark door, thinking that it hurts so much, and he would like to see what storage space he paid 20,000 for. Zio grabbed the door handle. Opening it, he sees a brick wall with a hole in it. Closing the door with all his might, the guy, angry, asks what it is, saying that he paid 20,000 per cubic meter, asking what are the prices for housing in commercial areas. Thinking about the crappy palace that he decided to throw it at money and ruin his youth, adding that when he is refined to the intermediate and advanced level, he thinks that the palace will become a real home. Walking away, attracting the girl's attention, the main character thinks that his heart hurts so much, and he gave 20,000, noting that it was so painful to part with them. The squad is walking through the forest when suddenly someone asks that there is a city in front of them. The main character turns to the lieutenant, walking with his back to the entire squad. That earlier he said that this is the remnant of the civilization that existed before the disaster, and the secrets remaining there can help them, superhumans. Seriously looking away, Zio asks what the secret is. Chu, imagining images of dark heroes in the background, says that he is not sure, but only knows that legends say that supermen have existed for a very long time. But only recently they began to appear more often, and there is even an organization of supermen that kills and controls behind the walls, called thugs. The guy, pursing his lips, looks at the man with suspicion, thinking about the organization, understanding. Zio is surprised by Zoo's answer, because he thought that ruins would be waiting for them in the mountains, and not a whole city. Both walk slightly ahead of the rest of the group. Zio clarifies what Zoo told him earlier about the remnant of the civilization that existed before the disaster. Zoo looks around at the rest of the group. Zio wonders whether the secrets left in that very city can really help other people. He looks ahead thoughtfully and continues to ponder what the secret is. In response, Zoo tells a legend about superhumans who existed a long time ago, but in the near future they began to appear much more often. He also added that there is an organization of superhumans that kills managers behind the walls. Members of the organization call themselves thugs. Zoo's story made Zio think, because if there is a whole organization of such people, then there are quite a lot of superhumans. He turned his gaze to Zoo and clarified whether the army was engaged in their capture. A member of the organization, of whom only one silhouette is visible, stands on a mountain of corpses. Zoo gives a negative answer because superhumans are much stronger than Zio can even imagine. Zoo continues his speech against the background of an image of a table, behind which 4 silhouettes of thugs are gathered. He says that currently all fortresses are aimed at superhumans and that no one knows exactly how dangerous superhumans are. However, the leadership of the fortress has created a shelter for superhumans and intends to use the power of the thugs for their own purposes. Thus Zoo revealed the true reason for their departure to explore the mountains. The other members of the group are not far behind the two. Zoo doesn't know what potential Jing Mountain hides, but he knows for sure that Wang Kanjiang, before setting off, found out information about other teams that are also now on their way to Jing Mountain. Zio was wary and, referring to the fact that the fortress wants to use superhumans, asked Zoo because his abilities probably played an important role in their plans. Zoo is angry at the people from the fortress because ordinary people do not regard superhumans as their own. He crushed the ant and told Zio that he couldn't even imagine what a person is capable of in relation to someone whom he does not consider one of his own. Baring his teeth, he ended up saying that he would never return. Liu Bu overheard their dialogue and insisted that they would not reveal Zoo's secrets. Both turned to look at Liu Bu. Zoo clarified that out of the entire group, he is most worried about Liu Bu. Zio pointedly pointed out that if the main cause of Zoo's worries did not return, then he could calmly return back. Liu Bu became wary and looked at the guy angrily. Zhu also did not remain indifferent and asked if Xiao was also a Superman. The guy got nervous and asked again. In fact, Zhu did not suspect anything, but pointedly noticed that Xiao had awakened a special ability to irritate people. Xiao feels very uncomfortable and smiles nervously. At the same time, he asks the palace whether he has a perfect level skill. Smiling mischievously, he reasons that the skill he perfected at a young age, however, it will not be able to compare with Yang's skills. He stopped abruptly. Xiao turned around and, pointing his finger at Yahello, advised the group to beware of puddles, because stumbling upon a leech at this time of year is deadly. Sunlight shines through the foliage of the trees. Zhu noticed something ahead and asked everyone to look ahead. Liu Bu is confused. He does not understand what is in front of him. A girl in a light dress stands in front of them, bowing her head to a tree. Zhu describes seeing a woman in white and wondering why she is rubbing the tree. Xiao compliments him with bewilderment as to why there is a girl in such a place. He suggested not to pay attention and go around, hoping that she would not pursue them. Clouds and mountain peaks can be seen from behind the crowns. The group looks warily at the place where the girl in white just disappeared. She takes an unnaturally large leap towards them and lands on all fours. Yang and Xiao point their guns at her, and Xinyu looks at the girl in bewilderment. The latter makes an aggressive rotational movement with her arms. Yahello and Liu Bu panic. Zhu decisively takes the situation into his own hands and says that they have nowhere to run, because even if there is something that can stop them now, then there is simply no point in further expedition to Mount Jing. He gives the command to follow him. Zhu and Yang warily prepare to flee. Xiao wonders why he suddenly felt so hot. Xiao shouted to Zhu to use his shadow on the girl if something happened and let him and Yang shoot her. They both went to belay Zhu. Zhu agreed and went on the attack. His palm began to exude black mist. He sent his shadow to attack. The shadow runs straight towards the girl in white. She is moments away from capturing the mysterious girl. The shadow grabs the stranger by the throat and presses her into the ground. All that was left of the girl was a white haze, and Xiao, seeing this, decides that Zhu's ability is quite enough. The whole group approaches the girl, who is still hanging by the throat from the hand of Zhu's shadow. The girl with a scary face is perplexed and assumes that the group was sent by the fortress. Zhu says he hasn't seen anything like this outside the walls, but the girl looks shabby. Xiao looks in surprise towards the shabby wood. Near the roots, the tree bark has been stripped off. Xiao notices something under the tree and tells his comrades about it. He opens the box. Xiao takes out a piece of paper from it and wonders what it is. In front of him is a card with a QR code for payment. Xiao thinks maybe it's something left over from the disaster, since the card is plastic and could have remained unharmed for a long time. The pattern on the map is puzzling. He asks his comrades if the pattern looks like a map of the labyrinth. Everyone looks at the map, puzzled. Zhu suggests that this may be a map of a mysterious city in the Jing Mountains. Xiao looks at him, puzzled. Ian draws their attention to the writing on the map. In close-up, on the card there is a request to scan the QR code for payment. Ian reads it out with bewilderment. Xiao is indignant that in order to go through the maze you also have to pay. Zhu puts the card in his chest pocket and suggests moving on. Close-up of the team, and a little to the side of Liu Bu with the girl. Zhu says that whatever is hiding on Mount Jing, they will have to take a look at it eventually. Liu Bu asks the others if they should take this shitty doll with them. Xiao, Zhu and Xinyu looked at him puzzled, but one of them suggested taking it anyway, it might come in handy. Liu Bu looks at the girl in white with confusion. A beautiful sunset can be seen from behind the mountain peaks. The group decides to stop in an angular cave for the night. Zhu looks ahead and notices that there is a pine tree growing nearby, and if anyone is hungry, let him pick up some pine cones for a snack. Xiao cuts the tree trunk with a knife and green liquid oozes out. Zhu is puzzled. He approaches Xiao and asks if he can drink it. Xiao looks at him. They were joined by Liu Bu and Xinyu. Liu Bu asks what it is and if it can be drunk. Xiao raises the knife with a cheerful expression and gives a negative answer. He does this to put some poison on his knife. Liu Bu is extremely surprised. He doesn't understand what kind of person Xiao is, that he even puts poison on his knife. Zhu and Xinyu refuse to comment on the situation and stand stone-faced. Liu Bu climbed a tree and left a girl in white sitting near the next one. He tries to reach the bumps. His foot slips off the bark and he screams. Liu Bu falls from the tree screaming. He lands on his butt and wonders why he is doing all this. There is also a girl sitting in the background. Liu Bu gives into emotions and desperately shouts that at the very beginning they had already decided to return to the fortress, but stumbled upon wolves. If it weren't for this situation, they would have already returned there. It's not for nothing that the idiom says that wolves in bay are the most insidious damn wolves. Xiao, who approaches him, interrupts him and asks whether he even understands what he is saying and what this very idiom means. Liu Bu desperately admits that he doesn't know. Xiao thoughtfully replies that in reality Bei is also a wolf. He continues to speak against the background of a picture of a wolf with a paw in a trap. The explanation talks about a wolf who stepped on a hunter's trap and could not step on his front paw due to his wounds. Two members of the pack approach the wounded wolf to help. Zio says that another wolf put the wounded man on his back and carried him. One wolf climbs on another. Zio throws something to Liu Bu, who tries to catch it. Yahello caught and found a lump in his hands. Zio continues to talk about the loyalty of wolves to their family. He looks at Liu Bu seriously and asks if people are capable of such devotion. Liu Bu looks at Zio, puzzled. The group lit a fire. Close-up of the group sitting in an angular cave near a fire. Zio holds a pine cone in his hand and talks about how all the vegetation has gotten bigger, even these pine cones. Zhu shares his reasoning about the reasons for the size of the plants, while Zio and Yang listen to him. He assumes that it's all about the high oxygen content and notices that despite physical fatigue they are still full of energy, which refers him to thoughts about a constant flow of oxygen. Zio is surprised and thinks that the phenomenon is quite reasonable and has a scientific basis. Yang, Zio and Zhu are sitting next to the fire. Zio asks about the presence of places like Mount Jing near other fortresses. Zhu looked at him gloomily and answered positively, only there is a note that such objects are controlled by a company called Flame Source. Zio also gloomily asks for the name. He then wonders why he hasn't heard of such a company and whether it belongs to some kind of union. Zhu looks thoughtfully at the fire and, against the background of the emblem of this company, answers Zio, calling the company an independent consortium that controls up to 20 fortresses. He finds it remarkable that they are relatively far from their 113 fortress. Zio justifiably does not know about such a company. Zio responds by asking about knowledge of living conditions in the place controlled by this company. Zhu closes her eyes and waves her naked face negatively. Yang joins the dialogue, commenting on the mystery of the territory controlled by the source of the flame. Zio turned his head towards Yang in surprise. Ian's close-up against the silhouette of a flying dinosaur talks about the rumors. Someone saw huge prehistoric birds in the sky. Yang looked at the main character and said that the Flame Source Company has such power that it has suppressed this place, and perhaps only the main leadership of the Flame Source Company knows what is happening inside. Surprised, Zio wondered if she knew more than Zhu. He wondered in his mind if she belonged to any organization. Sitting on a stone, Zhu asked if the main character had read Journey to the West. He imagined the man lifting up the golden column. He stated that it says that someone could lift a stick weighing more than 6 tons, which could destroy mountains. Looking at Yang and Zio, he noticed that at first he certainly didn't believe it, but now he thinks that perhaps this person really exists. Putting his hand to his chin, the protagonist thought that he had never read about the Journey to the West, but to argue that more than 6 tons can crush mountains, as is the carrying capacity of agricultural tractors used in trading cities and factories, is 10 tons, so even if there is a slight overload, it can pull 12 tons. The guy started coughing when he tried to eat the cone. He looked at Zio with an angry look. He approached him with a smile and asked him to make another wish or something like that, so that another animal would fall before their feet. Frowning, the main character replied that last time it was an accident. He asked if the guy really thought the main character was capable of this. He noted that if he needs to, then he should speak. The enraged guy cried out that if his wishes were fulfilled, he would have long ago wished that an animal would now appear on his doorstep to eat. There was a noise on the street. Zio and Yang prepared to shoot. They looked at the exit from the cave. Dark streams of mana hovered before them. Many wild animals were walking towards the cave. Holding the gun in front of him, he asked Liu if it was his order. He replied that he just said it in passing. Zio grabbed his hand and asked him to order the animals that they eat vegetarian food today and let them leave. Liu asked if Zio thought it would really work. He ordered him to speak, assuming that it would suddenly work out. The animals looked at him with stone faces. Liu tearfully asked them to leave. Many animals immediately ran away from there. Taken aback, Liu asked if it worked. The stunned protagonist asked how this was even possible. Frowning, Zio suggested that Liu had awakened his luck like Yuan. The night sky was surrounded by forests. Looking at the sky, at the many birds, the main character emphasized that this was not so and that something led the animals there. Surprised, he assumed that the animals were moving together in one direction and did not dare to attack them because they were being pursued by something more terrible. Streams of wind came from the forest. There was a chain on the ground. She suddenly began to rise. The beast was chained. He continued to move through the forest. He walked through thick grass. A powerful wind came from the dark forest. People stood at the exit of the cave. An enraged Zio asked what those sounds were. He continued to stare into the darkness. Looking at the frightened Liu, he asked if the sound had disappeared. The guy suggested hiding somewhere else for a while. Frowning, Zio asked him to wait, noting that animals have a much stronger instinct for danger than humans, and these animals were clearly trying to hide in their shelter, so this cave should be relatively safe. Kneeling down, the main character asked what exactly they were hiding from, and what that sound of chains was. Yang replied that there must be something in the forest that would frighten even them. The main character with a serious face asked if they noticed that. He remembered the many human bones along the rocks. Zio said that they saw human skeletons in the gorge when they passed through it, but it was unusual not to see animal skeletons in the forest. Frowning, he stated that any living creature could die from attack, disease, and old age. He asked how they didn't see a single skeleton. He remembered how the fish bones disappeared in the forest. The main character noticed that, to make sure, he deliberately threw out fish bones in the forest. As a result, they disappeared the next day, and there were no traces left around. Turning around, he said that there is also Zuzia's body, which disappeared without a trace, and all these missing people have one thing in common: they all disappeared into the forest. Frightened, Liu wondered if it was possible that after animals evolved, plants also evolved. Zio replied that it was unclear. Zhu said with a serious face that there was no need to be too nervous and it was good that they realized this earlier. At least they could take precautions in advance. The frightened Lei noticed that there was no danger as long as they stayed away from the forest. Zhu presented their route and reported that it lay in relatively sparsely wooded parts of the ridge and hills. The main character, with a puzzled look, wondered if everything would be so simple. He began to hear powerful gusts of wind in the forest. Zio was dumbfounded by this. A monster with red eyes looked at them. There were chains on his hands. Steam was coming out of his mouth. Yang, with a serious face, began to aim at the beast. Her face was serious. He took the pistol off the safety. They, together with the main character, were preparing to shoot. Zhu screamed loudly so that as soon as he appeared, they would start shooting at him, and he would order his shadow to go around him. The chain flew up above the ground. Frightened, Zio reported that he was approaching. A powerful aura emanated from the forest. Taken aback, the main character assumed that judging by the sound, he was getting further away from them. Standing in the cave, they wondered what was happening. Frowning, Zio noted that this monster was afraid to leave the forest, and the cave is located about 10 meters from the forest, and it looks like the animals were hiding there before. Turning around, Zio stated that there was something wrong with the forest, but they were lucky to escape it. Stretching out his hand, Sui said that the danger had passed, so they should rest and he would be the first on duty today, and after midnight the main character and Yang would replace him. They looked at each other. Standing next to Zio, Sui said that he couldn't help it if they didn't trust him, but he was on duty first anyway. Light smoke came from the extinguished fire. The main character and Ian were sitting near a rock. The afternoon sun illuminated the forest. There was an explosion. Zio and Yang suddenly woke up. Coming out of the cave, they asked what was happening. Looking at the smoke in the sky, Zio guessed that the Jing Mountain volcano was erupting. Stunned, Sui suggested that it seemed that the other teams infiltrating Mount Jing had made their move. With a serious face, he suggested that they speed up, noting that they needed to do it before they learned the secret. The main character looked at Suya and asked if he was tired of living. He emphasized the fact that it is unknown what dangers lie ahead for them, apart from this explosion. Frowning, Sui replied that they were already there and there was no turning back, so the only thing they could do was to find the secret of Jing Mountain as early as possible. Smiling, Zio noted that this is true and since they have already taken it, they need to bring it to the end. Yang watched him silently. Black smoke rose from the volcano. The group ran across the field. Lei wiped the sweat from his face and said that it was very hot. They saw a huge beetle. Moving further, Xinyu asked why they thought the animals became bigger but the people did not. Looking at Zio, she noticed that instead, people received superpowers. Turning around, Sui said that from ancient times to the present, human evolution has always been associated with mental abilities. After looking at him, the main character said that Teacher Zhang said that there is a gene in the human body that limits muscle development. He introduced the human body and the progress of evolution. He noted that this is because smart people are more attuned to their environment, causing the brain to require more energy, so muscle development must be limited to avoid competition with the brain for resources. Zio emphasized the fact that only humans have genes that limit muscle development, but this is the price they gave for the sake of intelligence. Taken aback, Yang stated that she saw a Superman with a developed physique. She asked what he would say to this. Putting his hand to his chin, the main character suggested that his ancestors had something to do with wild animals. The group was taken aback by this response. Looking at the main character, Xinyu said that Teacher Zhang at their school in the trading city is very smart and he must know a lot. Moving towards the mountains, Zio replied that this is true, he knows a lot of things, but he starts making up stupid things in class if he comes across something he doesn't know. He noticed that usually the teacher reads books and so on when he is free. There are such people behind the walls of the fortress, and they are all amazing. He said that in his free time, Zhang grows vegetables in the garden. Surprised, Xinyu asked why things in the trading city were not exactly as she thought. Teacher Zhang sneezed loudly. Sui asked him to wait with a serious face, noting that there was a human body ahead. They walked towards the human remains. While examining the corpse, they wondered how he could suddenly appear there, and perhaps it was someone from the King Consortium. The main character was suddenly taken aback. Holding up the iron pendant, Zio asked in his thoughts if this was the badge that the soldiers carried with them. He read on it that it was Suzuya. The enraged protagonist said that it was Suzuya who died from bee venom, and whose body mysteriously disappeared before they entered the gorge. He asked how Zu could have ended up there. Taken aback, he wondered if something had brought his body there. Raising his hand to the bones, the main character said that judging by the wounds on his body, some animal had eaten his entrails. Examining the remains, Zio asked what animal could have left such teeth marks, judging by the even bites on the body. The frightened Sui cried out that these were marks of human teeth. Turning around, the main character asked if he was sure. Sui replied that he was almost sure of that. Looking away, he revealed that he was bitten on the hand by his first love when he broke up with her while he was still in school. With a cry, Zio asked how he found the time to talk about such things when they were all scared. Looking at the corpse, Sui asked why there were traces of human teeth on the corpse and whether someone had gone crazy from hunger and eaten their own kind. Frowning, Zio asked what the guys thought, whether it was possible that what was dragging the chain last night was a person. The group was scared by this theory. Grabbing her gun, Young yelled that they were getting out of there and using a 3-man tactical formation in case something sneaked up on them. Turning around, Zio asked what a tactical formation was. Young asked if his teacher taught him this, noting that she thought he knew everything. Pointing her finger at the floor, she asked him to go to her left, adding that everyone controls their own sector of vision and should shoot directly at any strange creature approaching. Smiling, the main character replied that he understood everything. Moving along the gorge, the main character thought that Yang seemed to have taken command. As a matter of course, and no one said anything else. He assumed that everyone understood that Yang is not so simple. She is not only ruthless and not afraid of the changes taking place, but also knows details about the source of Flame Company. The sounds of gunfire were heard from the volcano. Looking up, Sui reported that the firefight was becoming more active, and it seemed that they were getting closer to the secrets of Mount Jing. Looking at the floor, Zio asked what was there. Sui picked up the shell casing from the floor. Examining it, he said that it was from a bullet fired by the King Consortium. The group was surprised by this. Looking at Zio, Sui whispered that it looked like the King Consortium was also there and had already made their move. The wild boar ran towards them. The group was scared. He ran past them. The guys targeted him and shouted that he was limping and they would take advantage of it. Liu said he never thought he would eat meat again. An enraged Sui ordered the boar to be left behind. Taken aback, Liu noted that he himself ran straight into their arms and they did not eat for almost a day. Smirking, the main character said that he envied them that they had brains, but they didn't even really need it. Liu asked what he meant. Raising his hands, Sui asked if it seemed like they would give away their location if they started frying meat there and lighting an open fire. Liu asked if the safest thing to do would be to defect to the king people if they were there. Holding her cap, Yang noted that the king had come for the secret of this place and would not let them go if they found it. Looking at the guys, she said that in this case the safest thing is to kill them as soon as they meet them and never show mercy. She noticed that to be merciful to enemies means to be cruel to yourself. Turning around, Sui asked them to move on, adding that turning back was certain death and moving forward was the only way to survive. Lei and Liu walked past Yang. Sui said that they further avoid meeting the King Consortium fighters based on where the shooting is coming from. Lei stated that he thought they would starve to death before allowing the Kingmen to catch them. Yang looked after them. Smoke rose from the volcano. Looking into the dark forest, Sui said that perhaps in an hour they will know what is hidden in this Jing mountain. He suggested that there was much less shooting. Looking at the main character, he whispered that if they had to fight guerrilla warfare in the future, they would have to abandon the other 3, who would not be able to keep up with the 3 of them. Turning around, Zio looked at the tired group members and agreed with Sui.